you guys are 8. Oh. You guys are after me.
It's 1 minute till, right? We're right out of time.
You have a presentation on it?
Oh, parking permits, 8A. Oh, you want to sit? Do you need me to? Sorry, I started parking.
Which one is yours? Yours is 8B?
I'm 8B. I'm 8B.
Oh, okay.
I'm 8B. Sorry, I started.
No worries.
I thought that was 8B. Because I talked to Evan, because I remember the VMT.
Yeah, he has 8C. Yeah. All right, we got the man here. It's
Sorry,
gonna go quick tonight.
little confusion there.
Commission presentation.
Oh my God, hi. And the face to name. You know him already, though. Face to the face to the name. I'm Paula, obviously. Yeah. I just flew in from our other location in Denver, like, literally 30 minutes ago. Yeah, with the speaker.
Right, we all ready?
I mean, I'm sure it's the same with me, like having to do so, so multi, sort of everything ecosystems. Like, all right, today I'm looking, today I'm dealing with city stuff, today I'm dealing with.
Well, let me sign in real quick. Welcome, everyone, to the, I'd like to call the June 1st, 2023 regular meeting of the Encinitas Planning Commission to order at 6:02 by my watch. Dina, could we have a roll call, please? Right. We could dispense with that. I can see that all 5 planning commissioners are present this evening, and if the records could so indicate, we'd like to begin each meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd join me, I'd appreciate it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We start each meeting with oral communications. For anyone wishing to speak on a topic not on tonight's agenda, may request to do so by filling out one of the white speaker slips. Dina, did we get any requests for oral communications?
We do. We have one speaker this evening, and that's Luke Schaefer.
All right. Let's come on up. You got 3 minutes.
All right. Good evening to the commissioners. I appreciate you guys' attention for this 3 minutes I have. My name's Luke Schaefer. You guys saw me speak about a month ago. I was born and raised in this community. I've gone through to Bethlehem, to Ocean Knoll, to Oak Crest, San Diego, graduated La Costa. I, at that point, departed, joined the United States Marine Corps, spent 15 years serving this country, that flag that we pledge our allegiance to. I come back to a community that is just being ran over by developers. And I know that that's the progression and the direction we're going, and I can't stop any of that. I get your guys' the crux that you guys are in as planners and commissioners to do this rightfully. The state comes down and says you have to put 838 low-income housing units in. Not fair. Not going to give you any money, not going to give you any of these things. But I'm really here to talk about the cowardice leadership that I saw take place over the course of 2 different meetings with you. You sat here and you listened to at least 40 people speak about an issue at the Piraeus Point, right? You pledge allegiance to this flag every single meeting, which I appreciate. I know what it means to serve that thing. I've been on 4 combat deployments, 2 in the air as a F-18 pilot and 2 on the ground. I get what it means. But it's to the republic by which it stands that you guys are serving. Do you understand that? Your job is not to go and listen to what the state has to say to you and then push it down on the republic. Your job is to defend us. And you had at least 95% of the speakers. The reasons you can knock these low-income housing down, which, by the way, they're lobbied by the developers themselves that have all this money. I don't have that money. Nobody in here has that money. They lobby for these developments to go through to the state so that they can come back around and sneak into the cities and get paid for them. And they're making good money. 27%, putting them at $20 million off of Piraeus Point. Right? What would be the difference if they made 15%? Still making a benefit, right? But you had at least 95% of the constituents that are professionals in their own right. They don't have the time to look through every single cross T and dotted I and lowercase j. But they are professionals, they have kids, they have grandkids that they've grown in that community and been there for a long time. And I would say at least 95% of them talked about safety. And the 3 reasons you can knock down one of these projects is health, safety, and wildlife conservation, which is very close to this project as well. But safety was mentioned numerous times. And then I sit here in the first meeting, Mr. Doyle, you sit here and talk about how you have an hour and a half worth of questions for the planners. I didn't see that night, the second night, maybe 15 minutes. And then yourself, Mr. Dalton, you had to hurry up the conversation to get through a vote. And you talked about this isn't a permit situation. We're not here talking about permits. The fact of the matter is, we're not gonna be in the room when the permits are talked about and 40% grades and walls being built and lack of safety for kids walking to school, and they're not gonna walk on Piraeus. Every time I see a kid walking on Piraeus with a parent, I stop and I ask them not to walk on the street anymore. It is just dangerous. And I have to say that the term is cowardice leadership. Your job, I know it's not easy, but you chose to be here. And I hats off to you, Mr. Sherrod, yeah, for attempting to get the power lines put down. I know that's not something that we can debate in here, but we don't have anybody else to tell. We're not gonna come into the permit department. Our job is to tell you, and your job is to say, hey, let's pump the brakes on this let's see what Lennar's willing to do,
Sir,
and
if
then
you
come back.
Wrap it up a little bit.
Got it.
We're over.
Okay, so that and placation to the points. Because everybody sat here and made these conversations, made these points, and then you didn't even think twice because of all the low-income requirements that you can't do anything about. You probably should have stated that first. And instead of wasting people's 4 hours worth of time sitting here listening to all the same complaints. And again, I'm not saying not to make the building go through. I'd rather the devil we know versus the devil we don't know. Let's just make it make sense. Let's use some of the lawyering money over from Mr. Porter and get him to go fight the state. We've got lagoons, we've got stuff that you can go back to them at.
Thank
So
you.
I would just
Really.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Dina, now just to be clear, we can't really discuss anything that was brought up tonight. We're limited to what's on our agenda. I'm gonna move forward. Do we have any changes to the agenda? And the consent calendar is clear. So we are going to jump straight into our regular agenda. Next up on our agenda tonight are 3 items. The first one is the item 8A, parking permit amendments. This is a City of Encinitas. This is a hearing to consider a recommendation to City Council regarding potential amendments to Chapter 14.41 of the Encinitas Municipal Code. Are there any disclosures? Seeing none, I think I'll pass this on to Traffic Engineer Abe Bandigan.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. Abe Bandigan, City Traffic Engineer. Here tonight, per direction from the City Council in April, discussing potential amendments to Chapter 1441 of Encinitas Municipal Code with an ordinance that can potentially go to City Council for review and approval. A little bit of background on this. We had requests from our residents on Via Molina, a residential neighborhood west of El Camino Real, north of Encinitas Boulevard, to establish permit parking zone on 4 residential streets in the area. We do have this municipal code, chapter 1441, that establishes regulations on how we start and implement these permit parking zones. We had, at that time, 3 active permit parking zones in the city. In August, this request was reviewed by Mobility and Traffic Safety Commission, August of 21. They recommended the staff evaluate this request for permit parking zone. We evaluated at that point, we being the engineering department, traffic engineering team, we evaluated based on our interpretation of the code and found that it did not meet 2 out of the 3 requirements. There were 3 requirements in the code. All 3 of them had to be met. We at that point found, our understanding was 2 of them were not met. This was presented to our Mobility and Traffic Safety Commission in November of 21. Mobility and Traffic Safety Commission, however, decided to vote for establishment of that permit parking zone. In February of 23, City Council heard staff recommendation that was not to approve this permit parking zone, again, due to our interpretation of the code and the language with which it was written and the guidance that was provided to staff. City Council, however, decided to approve this request from the public to establish a 4th permit parking zone, which went into effect today. Yes, June 1st, yes. There was a 1-month window that the residents had to ask for new parking permits. The signs installed yesterday, and the process of enforcing the permit parkings started this morning. At that council meeting in February, we recommended revisions to the municipal code to clarify how the code should be interpreted and how this permit parking zone will be evaluated in future cases. City Council read it. They liked parts of it. They didn't like parts of it. They suggested we go back to the drawing board, talk to Planning Commission, receive your input and feedback, talk to the Mobility and Traffic Safety Commission, basically regroup and go back to council with a proposed revision to the code that is blessed and reviewed and commented by both commissions. The current code, a very short summary, has a definition of residential parking that says this is a parking by residents, for residents, at their residences, guests of them, public and commercial services, and deliveries made to them. One minor revision to this that we had was the definition of their resident. The argument that the Via Molina residents had at that point was that there is an apartment complex which was a couple hundred feet away, and their parking is expensive, which is like $20-30 a year. But anyway, because of that cost, some people are not parking there and are parking on our streets. Now, our street, does that mean that that public road is not accessible to that apartment complex residents? Is the fact that they're walking 200 feet from their apartment complex entrance meet this definition of at their resident? Does this mean that they're still parking at their resident? Their interpretation was no, this is not their resident, this is my house, this is my residence in front of my property. Our interpretation was no, this is still for parking and accessing a residence. They're parking and accessing their house, so it's a residential parking still. Our interpretation was this code is meant to prevent commercial parking at Costco, a Home Depot, a Marshall's, TJ Maxx, Ralph's, Target, a business that is impacting a residential neighborhood and affecting their quality of life. The way it was at that point interpreted by the residents was that no, even if somebody parks from their house at the adjacent road in front of my house, this is non-residential parking because they're not residents of my vicinity, my street, my neighbor. This was a a discussion that we had, and we wanted to clarify that in the Muni Code. And the second piece, which is the justification for this permit parking zone, the three criteria was this proposed zone is designated for residential use only. This is pretty simple, clear. The second and third is that the parking zone is used as on-street parking site for commercial, commuter, and other non-residential parking purposes. Again, our interpretation was that we go survey the road. If we find out that the cars that are parked here are not here at midnight, are not here at 11 p.m., 10 p.m., that means these cars are not residents. At 4 p.m., if you find out half of the cars parked in the area are not there at 10 p.m., that means that these were customers of businesses, these are commercial customers of adjacent businesses that are impacting the neighborhood. But if they are there at 10 p.m., no matter where they reside, where they live, there are still residences of that. That was our interpretation. And then the third one is the non-residential parking adversely impacts the residential character and quality of life in the proposed zone. The fact that this was in the traffic chapter, traffic engineering opinion was that by quality of life mean the code meant for impact of parking capacity and parking demand and parking occupancy. We should not deal with people drinking in their cars while parking in there, or if somebody parks there, paints a customer's car. That's not the quality of life that this code is after. This code is after quality of life based on traffic engineering factors and parking supply and demand. Because of this, although there were a lot of issues with activities going on those 4 streets based on the photos that we saw from the residents, we did not consider this code to be met. And we were revising the code to clarify what the purpose of this code is. I'm not going into the details of what we're proposing to change. I assume the commissioners have read it. The gist of it is that we are proposing the code to be revised, the traffic code to be revised, to establish a more clear criteria. What does it mean to be residential parking? What does residential parking mean? What does it impact adversely impacting a quality of life in a neighborhood mean for parking supply and demand purposes? We're saying if you have a occupied parking in your community, meaning 95% of the parking spaces in your residence is occupied when we survey this during peak period, could be during 3 hours. The time window is open. We surveyed it in the engineering department. The burden is not on the residents to prove this. We go and survey, and if we find out there isn't ample parking available, at that point, we survey and find out how much of this parking demand that's in the neighborhood is the residences in the area. Again, there's no distance. It's not like if you're 500 feet away, you're not a residence. If it's there at 10 p.m. at midnight, that means people are sleeping there. Okay, there might be somebody who left the car there and left 3 miles away and left in a, living somewhere. I don't know, left the car for some reason. But in general, it's easy to, there are engineering surveys that we can find out how much of these cars are actually residing there, how much of these cars are from customers of adjacent businesses. If 25% of the cars impacting the parking in that area are non-residents per our new definition, then the location qualifies as being adversely impacted. Now, this is our code, this is our suggestion. As mentioned, City Council, when reviewed this, their idea was that this neighborhood is adversely impacted by illegal activities, behavior, people drinking, listening to loud music. There were a lot of stuff. I'm not sure if commissioners followed that council meeting. But again, as an engineer, as a traffic engineer, I did not have any quantifiable measure of incorporating those kinds of concerns into my proposed revision of the Muni Code. Maybe that's why council suggested Planning Commission get involved. If you have opinions, suggestions, recommendations with regards to how we can incorporate non-traffic engineering factor, non-parking supply and demand factors into establishing permit parking zones, this would be the avenue, this would be the opportunity to provide us that feedback, and obviously I will incorporate all these comments and inputs. We're not approving or rejecting anything tonight. This is a discussion, this is a input feedback meeting. I will incorporate that into the future report that I will present to the City Council. So your suggestions will all be in there. With that, I'm open to questions. Sorry for the long presentation. There was a lot of history. I wanted the Planning Commission to know why I'm here. I'm usually not here for a traffic item, so thought I'd clarify.
Thank you, Abe. Does anyone have any questions? questions of
I have
clarifications
a
at
I have
this
a
point?
clarification question.
I think, Chris first?
So there is no time that's associated with the amendment?
Meaning how soon it has to go to council? Is that the question?
I mean, the parking on the street isn't restricted to like 9 to 5 or some other time interval. It's 24 hours a day?
Oh, no, the permit parking zone that's established is from 8 PM to 8 AM, or 8 PM to 6 AM, I'm sorry. I think it's 8 PM to 6 AM.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding the recommendations to council. So will you then present our recommendation and then separately at the same meeting, present mobility's recommendation as two separate recommendations?
My plan is to incorporate all the comments. My plan is to, because technically the Muni Code amendment, only council has that authority. My plan is to provide a staff recommendation, planning commission recommendation, add, remove, new, whatever comes out of this meeting, and then similarly for mobility and traffic commission. And then council at that point would have to decide what they want.
Are the traffic and mobility comments in your report? Did I miss them?
They haven't seen, planning commission is first.
Oh, planning commission first,
Yes.
thank you. So let's kind of take a practical application to the new code. Let's say that a development on Piraea Street gets developed, or maybe a development on Quail Gardens, a very high-density project gets developed. And the developer makes a business decision not to put enough parking on the site. That's truly the business decision of that developer. And guests of the location and/or residents of that location, whether you're an owner or you are a tenant in that location, but there's not enough parking for you. So one parks in the street or in the neighborhood, close to the residents, much like what we saw on Via Molina. What would I have under your recommendations? What's the result of that? And can you walk me through what the citizenry would be able to do in a situation where a high-density project is spilling over into the neighborhoods?
Very good question. It did actually come up at our council meeting and prior to that. Initially, when the request from the neighborhood came in and Via Molina, the concern was this apartment complex. Our attorney reviewed court cases, similar cases, and the interpretation of, I'm not sure if it was the state Supreme Court, maybe Scott can help, I'm not sure if he has reviewed the previous council report. The interpretation of our attorney was that we're not allowed by law to, it would be technically discrimination to say you are not allowed to use a public street to park just because you're in an apartment complex. The assumption is that apartment complex, then the amount of parking they provided met the city requirement, whatever it was. If it's not enough, it is approved by the city, and they built it per the city standards, whatever our requirements were. And now these are residents of the city parking on public streets. So what happened in this case, although those 4 streets requested the permit parking zone, council included the apartment complex into the permit parking zone. So right now we have residents of that apartments, the permit parking zone is established, but council allowed apartment complex residents to pull permits just like residences. So somebody can pull a permit from that apartment complex and go park in front of somebody's house on those residents, on those streets. So we cannot, in other words, tell the apartment people, you cannot park in these streets. That's still a public road.
Right. So what's out in front? I remember that conversation with, on Via Molina, that the residents in the apartment complex, which are actually, well, assumed to be parking in front, can go pull a permit from the city and resume parking there.
Correct.
Okay. And that would then, so the steps required if I live on Plato and the development gets built, or I live in Quail Gardens and the development gets built, then my response as a citizen is to come to you or the Planning Mobility Commission to say, I want a parking residential area just for our.
So I'm not
And
sure
what's the
if
threshold-
this.
And what's the threshold, I'm sorry, and what would the threshold be for me to qualify to ask that question?
This current language does not really help in that case. They were not qualified for the permit. The Via Molina, this new location that was permitted, was not permitted because of the apartment complex impact. They were permitted, council's judgment was there is a lot of activity going on over there that might not be from the residents of this apartment, might be from others, which not talking about how much evidence we had about, but there were a lot of stuff going on, illegal activity that council thought it would help. It's not just because, to answer your question, if somebody comes and says there is 200 units built here and they're impacting my neighborhood, this doesn't cover that. They would not be qualified. Even if they submit a petition, the process is just they submit a petition, we go evaluate and come back. But with this code, we're saying there has to be commercial, like non-residential impact, and that apartment complex that you're referring to would still be residential impact, impacting the street, so they won't qualify.
So the code going forward that you've proposed is still a residential project, and the reality is the spillover effect
Is not addressed.
is not addressed.
No, because our interpretation is they are still residents of the city parking on a public road.
But that means they could park on, do we then have to put up as a city, no parking on Piraeus?
Let's not drift into deliberations just yet.
Okay, well, this is just like I'm just trying to get on a better
No, it's,
understanding,
I
Chair,
understand
of
your line of reasoning.
If A, then B, then C, and we're talking about a discussion on code changes, and it doesn't seem like the code is written to reflect some of the things that are happening in our city. So why not
Well,
take a moment
I
to
think
incorporate those in?
we could have a good discussion on this, because I have some thoughts on this as
Sure.
well.
Okay.
But we've asked traffic engineer the question. I want to have like public comment before we get into deliberations.
I have another question.
Okay, go for it, Susan. I also have a question
Okay,
after you.
so in
And
terms
last
of
is
these
Commissioner Dahl.
25% of the parking that's non-residential, do we currently require a permit, for example, for street work or for, let's say, filming or for other commercial type purposes like construction? Would they be required to have a permit if they're taking up street parking that's normally residential?
No, I don't think there is any requirement. I mean, they might have to pull other permits, but just for the parking purpose on the street, no, it's public parking, they can park on the street, if that's your question.
Our only other thing that we have for parking at the moment is the 72-hour time
Correct.
limit.
Unless there's other sign limiting parking in some way, but yeah, in general, it's just a state law that's 72 hours.
Commissioner Dalton.
The second criteria to determine if it's adversely impacting the residents is if 95% of the parking is used during the peak period. Is that 95, just to clarify, is that 95% of the parking during the peak period is non-residential parking, or are you just saying of all parking used is using 95% of the available spaces?
Correct. In other words, our idea was that if only 50% of the parking capacity of the street is occupied, we shouldn't really care who those 50% are, even if all of them are from the Home Depot nearby. It's okay, because we still have at peak period 50% of the street available. But if 90% of the street is full, there's very few parking spaces available, then that's the time to go evaluate if these are residents or non-residents.
Okay, thank you very much.
Abe, I have a question for you concerning the zones themselves. So now, if we have a parking permit zone and I live on the other side of that line, I can't get a permit to park there, even though I might be reasonably close. Is that a true or a false?
That is correct. That is true.
Okay. And how do we decide where the zones are? I mean, theoretically, someone could have drawn a zone that eliminated that apartment building if it was on the edge.
Correct. So when this was being established, City Council directed us on where to put that boundary. on Via Molina. So there's a very small piece of Via Molina just west of El Camino that's adjacent to the businesses is not included in the boundary. The boundary just stops at I guess, where the lot line for the business meets the residential line. The locations that we've had, the 3 zones that we had before this and this one, are kind of cordoned in a way that it doesn't really create that situation where we have to drop a resident, a neighbor qualifies and another neighbor doesn't qualify. We haven't had that situation, but it might happen in the future where we have a situation where we have to draw a line somewhere and say, okay, you don't qualify anymore.
I know there's that parking permit section over behind Saxony and Encinitas Boulevard, kind of way up there.
Seacrest, correct.
And that one specifically, I think, excludes that apartment complex.
That is correct. That was the first one that was established in the city, and I guess tough to say. It is not in line with what we were talking about at that point.
It happened on my very first planning commission meeting 6.5 years ago.
Yeah, so we clearly separated a residential neighborhood from an apartment complex with that, which our attorney's opinion was that maybe at that point the law was not in effect, or the court case was not at that point, the judgment was not there. But yeah, we would not make that same decision right now.
Okay, so this new subsection doesn't really address the drawing of zones at all. That's handled at a higher level, is that?
That's a fair assumption, yes.
Okay,
Case-by-case basis.
Said I have no more questions on this.
I have one question based on
Go
that.
for it.
So moving forward, if a neighborhood meets these requirements, would it then go to city council to draw the zone?
It is still a city council. Drawing the zone, I guess, it's tough to say before seeing what the situation, what the location is. We probably would draw some sort of a proposal, but the approval is still on council. Because the Muni Code is clear on that. It needs an ordinance.
Thank you.
All right, let's open this up to public comment. Do we have any public speakers on this item?
We do. We have 2 this evening, and first up is Dennis Caden.
All right.
There's a PowerPoint presentation of his on our X Drive.
Thank you, Commissioners, for allowing us to speak. I'd like to start with our circulation element, Policy 2.4. When considering circulation patterns and standards, primary consideration will be given to the preservation of character and safety of existing residential neighborhoods. And our founding fathers for Encinitas, we got beat up pretty bad before the 80s. Encinitas grew sometimes at 30% a year. There were a lot of issues, so they added where conflicts arise between convenience of the motorists and neighborhood safety, community character preservation, the latter will have first priority. Next slide, please. So in fulfilling the intent of the circulation element, Policy 2.4 is a method of protecting existing neighborhoods from negative impacts of overdevelopment. We're requesting you recommend to add the R30 overlay developments to the no parking streets and the section 14.41. However, I wanted it limited to those parking those projects where there is no parking. For example, you brought up one where every surrounding street has no parking. The other one, basically the main street has no parking. So we cannot defy the Newton laws of 2 objects of matter cannot occupy the same space at the same time. Something's got to give. The 2 R30 site examples given below where no parking is allowed on their bordering streets, therefore any excess will negatively impact its existing residents. And next slide. So this is one of the projects where every surrounding street, I didn't include Carter, the fire department says there's no parking on that either. So there's no place for these new residents to go unless they break the law. Next slide. An example of the old code for that project on Piraeus would have had 365 parking spaces. according to the code for the R30s, they get 197 and a half. The fire department asked for a bigger buffer, so they gained 25 parking spaces, but they're still deficient 94 spaces. I can't imagine how many might be for the one on Quill Gardens, which would be a lot worse. Next slide, please. Yeah, they're on Quill Gardens. I mean, they got absolutely no place to go except those two little streets, Kristen Court and Quill Point Lane. I mean, those cars are going to go somewhere. So, last slide. The predictable excess of vehicles must park somewhere, and the likely places are on the narrowing neighborhood streets. The consequences of failing to adequately plan for parking are quality of life and safety issues, as you heard regarding the residents dealing with the Molina luxury apartments. Now is your time to make a practical planning decision for the foreseeable future. Thank you. And by the way, when quality of life, according to the traffic department, if they're responsible for Leucadia Boulevard, that road needs to be repaved. It is one of the worst roads and one of the most traveled roads in Encinitas. So Abe, I don't believe the traffic department has any idea what quality of life in Encinitas is about. Thank you, sirs.
Thank you, Roy.
All right, our final speaker on this
could I
item is
just-
Scott Campbell.
Could I ask for the slideshow to be put back to the first slide, if I could see the policy 2.4 that you printed?
Yeah, we can ask questions.
Oh, it's up. Thank
No,
you. Oh,
no.
thank you.
Do you want to ask anything about
No,
this?
no further question.
All right. Thank you. Scott, you're next.
Okay, good evening, Commission and staff. My name is Scott Campbell. I live in Encinitas District 1. No PowerPoint show for this. I couldn't help myself. When I was a little kid, I lived in a place, and we had the hippies were parking in our neighborhood going to the naked beach. And they put up no parking, literally no parking, permit parking, just for this little neighborhood. There's still no parking. This is 40, 50 years later. I used to live on Smart Court in Encinitas neighborhood, and I had a couple extra cars. I couldn't park them all in my driveway and everything, and I parked in front of the house, and the lady keyed my car and stripped off the registration stickers. So this is a real issue, and this is just 100 yards from my house. There's no parking. We're state laws. We're kind of in a bad spot. It feels like the intent of this is to actually make it impossible to make any more permit parking zones. And I get it. That's a good idea. You're smart. You're protecting the city. It's good. It's a good idea, Abe. What's the alternative? No parking. Instead of no parking, permit parking. Okay, fine. We'll make no parking on the street. I don't know what's going to happen. It's weird with this issue. And the state says, you only have to have this many spots. The reality is people have vehicles. I don't know what we're going to do. It's an impossible situation. Part of this is due, like this previous speaker, Luke, said, due to the failure to stand up to the state on this high density. If we didn't have all these density things, we wouldn't be here today talking about parking. It's not your job to do it, but you talk to the people that is kind of there, they can make the policy. And this all goes round and round and round. If we start with the basics, we can fix this, but we're just keeping it Band-Aids. Anyways, thank you. I know you're going to approve this. It is probably it's a good idea, but consider these thoughts for other decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Dina, is anyone else?
No more speakers for this item.
All right, I'm going to close public comment. Move on to, does staff wish to respond to any of the speakers? Or we'll move on to deliberation.
Only one thing, Chair. I do like to clarify that we are open to, this is not final. We are open to recommendations from Planning Commission. So this is not
And
like approval or
Mobility's gonna
rejected.
get this after us.
Yeah, so if you feel, because there are other factors that we kind of touched on, we didn't get deep into, the quality of life about, again, I wish I had photos from what the residents presented to council that night. Non-parking demand-related factor. If the neighborhood, for some reason, I don't know, if there is a scenic neighborhood, let's say we had a similar situation on Cornish, that triangle, the fork of Cornish, and San Alejo, where there was a nice view of the ocean, and we had a lot of complaints from. There was like a small. There's still that small complex there. Luckily, there aren't that many houses on that stretch of Cornish, that beginning southern end of Cornish. But let's say that we had a lot of houses there, and because of the nice view in the evening, people start listening to loud music, drinking, having fun, and the residents say, "Well, you got to establish a permanent parking zone here because of everything that's going on here." Those are concerns that are real, that are legit, but the traffic code, my understanding is that where it talked about quality of life was talking about parking impact. But if Planning Commission's opinion is that we have to incorporate other measures to address other concerns and create some sort of a criteria for those other stuff, those are also, I guess, criteria that I'm open to. It's not like I'm against any of those. I just, as an engineer, I don't have any metric to evaluate.
Yeah, we're supposed to have a conversation here. Here's a question for you. Now, the example you just proposed, here's this corner. It's right next to a desirable place to stop. All day long, it's packed with people who seem to be residential people, but at 10 o'clock in the evening or midnight, whenever you check, it's to see who's actually there, it's empty again. Even though that's not commercial traffic, would that meet these criteria?
So with the new revision that we're proposing, if they're not there at night, they're not impacting. So they're non-residents, but they're not there at night. So our way of establishing that non-residence parking, that 25%, is we go there at 10 p.m., at 11 p.m., at 2 a.m. That's how we did it on Via Molina. We read license plates, and then we check license plates at 4 p.m. again, at 10 a.m. again. If these cars are there at 2 a.m. and they're there at 10 a.m. or 4 p.m., then the 10 a.m., 4 p.m., they're not customers of businesses or they're non-residential. They are residences. So if that car that was there at 6 p.m. was there at 2 a.m., they are residents who are enjoying the view. But if there is a car that's there but it's not there at 2 a.m., then they are impacting the neighborhood.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I do like the actual definitions, finally. It's like, the first thing I always look whenever I look at one of these is, what is the definition? What is a residential? I mean, and so I think we need to have this quantifiable, and I respect your approach of, like, we can count cars, we can count percentages. That's well within our purview. You know how to do that. Are the numbers right? The 95% and the 25%? I suppose that one's up for debate, but I like the formula. I think it's really hard. I mean, we've spent the last 5 years stripping away, things that are hard to quantify. Neighborhood character is like, I try not to bring it up anymore because people don't take us seriously when we say that. Quality of life is another thing. It's important. I think we all know what it means, but it's hard to quantify. It's hard to, so we need to turn a lot of these things into numbers so that they can be enforced, because otherwise people are going to weasel out of things. So I like the approach you've taken. I'll pass this on. We're into deliberations right now. Does anyone like to jump in?
I will, not that. I see this similar to what we did recently about the objective design standards. It feels like really all we're doing, we're not altering the meat of this ordinance very much. We're just saying, well, when we say adverse impact, here are the measuring sticks that we're going to use to do that. And in that way, the two that I see, section 1A3, those seem to make sense to me. I'll say more broadly, I'm generally opposed to privatizing city streets. I think the public streets should be available for public use. And I would be hesitant to do anything that created an us versus them. We're homeowners versus apartment renters or whatever. Everybody's a citizen of the city, and everybody has a right to park on a street. So I don't think that that's addressed in this, and I don't think it should be. I guess I should say, I think this addresses that correctly by not digging into that, and it sounds like there's legal precedence not to do that. And then my other final thing, just to play off one of the questions posed to us, was I don't think we should be mandating social behavior in our traffic or parking ordinance. I think if there's loud music or public intoxication or anything like that, there is other ordinances and laws that govern that kind of behavior. But within our parking standards, I think it should be a pretty black and white measure.
Great, thank you, Steve.
So I'll go. So it's interesting, Steve and I had kind of pushed our buttons at the same time to talk, and I had also just written down objective design standards, which is to Steve's first point, is I do think I like this approach too, where there are these numbers, there is the ability for staff to go and to take these measurements and make a decision based on some quantifiable evidence that they have. I think that's important. I agree that I don't think that we should mandate social behavior, and I think that also becomes a slippery slope. We might first be talking about that corner at Cornish, and then suddenly we're talking about all of Neptune. And no one except residents can park on Neptune now to go to the beach because the people that live there want to have that space available for them. So I very much don't want to go down that slope of privatizing public parking. I do think that residents are residents, whether they live in an apartment complex, whether they live in a low-income apartment or a very low-income apartment, or they rent a house or they own a house. And I do believe in public access and public access to public property. And I do like the way this has been written. I don't have any issues with the 25% and 95%. I'd be willing to hear what other people think about those numbers. But sitting here and talking about it, I don't have any other recommendations other than those myself.
Cool. Hey, Abe, maybe you can answer this question. The last one where we did approve the permit parking, would they have passed this muster, 95%, 25%?
No. There was ample parking available. We surveyed that location 4 times. And, the first one is the 25% was not there because with this current definition, everybody there, not everybody, but like our survey showed the majority were.
I know you can't say with any definitively here, but, would they have passed with these, would they have?
No, I can say definitively they wouldn't pass.
So they were less than the 95%?
Yeah, because the 95% was not there. We surveyed the roadway multiple times, these 4 streets, and at all 3-4 times that we surveyed, there was ample parking available. So they would never reach that 95% occupancy. So there wasn't any parking issue there. And it wasn't their opinion either. It wasn't like the residents were saying we don't have place to park. The residents were saying, okay, only 1/3 of our street is occupied, but it's occupied by,
the wrong
I have
kind
to
of
say,
people.
like bad people, yeah. Like people doing stuff that we don't like and we don't feel comfortable. We don't, it's bad what they're doing. And our problem was that, well, our code is traffic. I can only look at it objectively with a traffic, parking, supply, and demand. If, like, there are 10 people, getting tickets from sheriff's office doing illegal activity, that is not a justification for me to use the traffic code to establish a parking permit. Again, all those might have been legit concerns, but when I surveyed it, it showed to me that these cars belong to it, not all of them, but obviously the majority, big enough, the supermajority were residents, people who lived there, not on that street, might have been from the apartment complex, might have been from the adjacent street, but for any reason, they decided to park there and they slept in their houses while their car was there. And if they were doing bad behavior, illegal activity.
Let's table that in. I think you've taken the right approach, and Steve, you mentioned this is like a parking issue. I mean, we have rules against noise. We have rules against unruly behavior. They don't belong here. But I'm trying to extrapolate out and trying to imagine a situation where this would happen. You look at a street and say, wow, this is parked, it's packed every day, so you can never get parking downtown. I mean, so 95%, it's like you have to kind of like, somebody has to draw a boundary to decide if the cars in that area hit the 95% threshold.
I mean, Neptune is a good
do you wait
example.
until someone asks, or how would you do that?
Yeah, it's petition-based. It's based on receiving a petition.
Entirely petition-based.
Correct.
But you look at the parking, your surveys are at night, so you're seeing if the people who live there have parking and able to park there overnight.
No, the 95% is during the peak period. So if
during
at like, because of the fact, again, our assumption was this is for commercial impact. So if at 5 p.m., 6 p.m., where everybody's off their work, they're doing shopping, businesses at their max occupancy, and the parkings are full, or there's not enough parking, or people feel like it's better to park here, we surveyed there, and then the nighttime survey is only to find out if the cars that we surveyed at 6 were residents' car or were customers' cars. That's just to evaluate the survey from 6 p.m., from 5 p.m.
I recall the conversation a little differently, where the residents showed pictures. They had to put their trash cans out in front of their house to get their trash cans in front of their house because cars were parking, so they couldn't take their trash out. That became a safety issue. And I recall seeing commercial landscape vehicles with attachments there were then commercial vehicles in the area. So I don't know if the code as written deals with, you might be correct, and I'll assume you are correct, that during your survey counts that there was not the 97% threshold, but what I recall happening on Villa Molina was there were commercial landscape vehicles with signs on the side saying Bob's Landscaping. I guess that could be qualified as that person was a resident of the apartment complex or a resident of Villa Molina streets, those 3 streets, that would qualify for them to park their car. But I recall those commercial vehicles being there and the parking being so impacted that they couldn't take their trash out.
There
So
might
that
have been
meant that
cases.
there were a lot of cars on the street of I could not take my trash out. And that could be a similar situation that might occur, as Mr. Cadden talked about, on those streets near Quail Gardens and then the streets near Piraeus, where they're short on parking. We know there's going to be problems with parking. And we're all, this doesn't seem to be forecasting how to handle those situations that we're walking into. Should it be? This is not the right place for it?
Again, so I think you answered 2 different questions. For Villa Molina, about that landscape truck, yeah, there were photos there, and there were photos of people, their frontage, there were 2 cars parked. They couldn't put out their trash bin. They had to use their driveway. Our survey showed there is ample parking space available. My position as a traffic engineer was that if there is parking on the other side of the street, you don't have the right to park right in front of your house. If somebody got that parking, you can go park to the other side. You can go park in front of your neighbor's house. Now, that's an inconvenience. We all know what the situation can become, but at the end of the day, as was brought up, it's public parking. We don't have the right to be able to put our trash bin right in front of our side yard. That's not a right. If it's not available, if there's a car parked, we have to go 5 feet to the left, 10 feet to the right, find a spot. Those cases were there. There were ample photos of that situation. Our survey was broadly done along these. It wasn't just done for 1 house or 2 houses. Along those 4 streets, when we surveyed those, each one of those at those survey times had enough parking. Now, that's correct, that 1 house might have to walk 200 feet, 150 feet to get to the area where there weren't any cars parked and parked there. It is an inconvenience, but our survey didn't assume each house would have enough parking for themselves. That's question number 1. For question number 2, this doesn't address that, as was mentioned, but if Planning Commission's position is that we want to address this concern, that if in the future a development project adversely impacts an adjacent street because of lack of parking in there, because of the high price of, it could be parking pricing. An apartment complex might decide to charge $500 per day. There is ample parking in there, but decides to charge a lot, and now it overspills into the adjacent area. If Planning Commission's position is that we are, because the traffic's concern was at that point similar, privatizing public road. If they start to charge, they have the authority, the legal right to charge for parking, but do we have the legal right to say this public parking on this street does not belong to you, only belongs to the houses on this street? That was our position. It does not. We don't have the right to do that and privatize public road. But if Commission's concern is that, no, we want to take care of community character, we don't want 100 cars coming from that apartment and park on this small cul-de-sac, this is the opportunity. This is a time, as you asked, this is a time to provide that suggestion. I'd like to throw it back to the commissioners. What happens? And Abe brings up a very good point. Let's just say any of these apartment complexes that Mr. Cadden talked about, or the Paredes project, or the Clark Street project, all these high-density projects built in residential neighborhoods, decide to charge $500 a stall for their parking after the project gets built. And I don't want to pay that, so I'm going to go park in front of his house. And
Yeah,
every one
but,
of my people.
I mean, that's kind of a red herring, because
It
that's
is.
not happening yet. It could happen theoretically.
I think
We
it's
could
quite
permit
clear.
these
I think,
things,
but
still,
I think it's
let me
quite clear
argue
that
the
we're short.
opposite side point here. Come on, you've had a. Let me argue that
please.
now we're concerned about privatizing roads and annexing little buildings and undesirables, people we don't want mixing with our cars. No, this has already happened. The first permit parking zone kind of cuts out that whole Encinitas apartment building.
Right.
And people will want to do this again. And I was thinking that perhaps we should have language in this so that these parking zones have to be contiguous. They can't, I'm not sure exactly how I would do this, but it's a social equity thing. I don't want to be able to just carve out my little neighborhood because I'm the one who filed the petition, and now I've got this like 2 blocks where no one else can park, whereas people across the street who didn't really know about this miss out. So I was thinking it's like it shouldn't be able to carve it out of the middle of another group. It should be connected, or if that's it should have a radius around it where people within a larger radius of, maybe it is just 2 blocks, but people within 500 feet should also be able to get a permit because these are the residents.
I agree.
And I mean, there it's like, to do something like that while also saying that, these, and it could be, we could do just for R30s, although that will backfire on us. I know at HCD, or at least not backfire, but we'll hear something about that. And council may or may not have, the wherewithal to push that one through. But it's, I lean towards opening it up. It sucks that, yes, if they were to have $500 parking fees and people didn't park there and it turned into this huge hoorah, it would then go to council, and council has already been proven from the last permit, then can overrule the code. And they may do that again if that happens.
My question is, should this code anticipate, look forward for the multiple projects that are coming and incorporate some suggestions into the code, or let it ride and let city council deal with it later?
Yeah, no, if there's suggestions, this is the time to make them.
Right,
It's right here.
That's why I'm throwing out an issue which I think
I
is
know.
going to be a problem. How do we?
It was contradictory to the one I was throwing out, though. That was what kind of threw me.
I'm just trying
thinking,
to
how
think.
can I make it more inclusive so that people don't get cut out?
Right, and so I'm going to jump in here because
Yeah, I think we're in a.
I'm in agreement with Kevin. I think that if anybody, an apartment complex, whether it's an R30, whatever kind of development it is, if they meet the city's requirements for parking, I don't think we can punish the people who then rent or buy in that area by telling them they can't park in the neighborhood. And I don't think that the landlords will really charge that kind of exorbitant rent because nobody's going to pay it. So I think the market will speak to that. And I think we're really getting into an area of discriminating against people who live in particular areas and favoring people who live in other types of residences. And to go to the point about the there's lots of arguments back and forth that these R30s and the other developments aren't really underparked. There's a whole school of thought that they're overparked, and so much of Southern California and the rest of the country overparks, and we have too much parking. And if you have less parking, people will have fewer cars. And I can tell you anecdotally from personal experience of having kids that have gone to public colleges, and the question becomes, do I take a car? And the answer is no, I do not take a car. I don't buy a car, I don't take a car because I don't have any place to park it. So I do think that some of these things also work themselves out when people make decisions, are we going to get another car? Or maybe we should get rid of a car, we should sell a car, and I think, and have an alternate way of getting to places. I think some of these things also through life work themselves out that way. So I am with Kevin on this. I don't want us to put any language in here that I would feel is discriminatory in any way.
I don't want to discriminate. I just want to anticipate an issue in the code where we're going to see parking spill into the communities. I agree, we don't want to privatize the streets, but we're also going back to impacting the quality of life of people. And I can tell you, downtown the parking's $200 a stall, and it adds X% of rent to to a tenant's occupancy. So that tenant moves to Mission Valley where they can pay free parking. And those are business decisions that those companies make. But parking is a cost. We clearly have seen $20 a year or $25 a year, whatever it is, at the Village luxury apartments has presumed that those people have moved and parked across the street. We've determined that they're residents.
But I think that was anecdotal to the people that lived in that neighborhood. I don't think it was the people who lived in the apartment complex saying that they weren't willing to pay $20 a year. I mean, $20 a year is nominal, right? I mean,
It's not, again, nominal for whom? Clearly, it was enough that the people who are the residents of that community came to city council, came to the parking, came to mobility, and came to planning asking for parking zones. So there clearly was an impact. Now, can you make that person see where they live at night? I don't think we can do that. But
that was a behavioral impact that they were concerned with. They weren't concerned that they didn't have enough parking. They were concerned about the behavior of people who were parking.
All right, so whether it's
those are two different
I want to hear
things.
from Steve if I can.
Sure.
Just to your point, Bob, I kind of agree with Chris in that if our, in a slightly different way though, if we're looking to reduce our carbon footprint and look for alternatives, sometimes maybe parking is going to have to get a little more difficult for people to be encouraged to do other things, right? But this strategy, like, the analogy is widening the freeway just encourages more people that weren't driving to drive because now it's wider, right? So in your scenario, or this scenario we're talking about where there's an apartment complex charging so the tenants move off-site and park on the street, if that street parking becomes too difficult, well, now they're willing to go pay and buy their parking back on site, right? So I think it kind of works itself out. The more you make that parking available on the street, the more people will use it. And then the more people that are using it makes it unavailable, the more people that are willing to pay to park on their site.
I'll give you that, but we realize that there's no public transportation on Prairies, there's no public transportation on Clark. You have to walk, I guess, to Encinitas Boulevard to catch public transportation. So if we're talking about climate action plan, if we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, then we have to, as a city and as a community, provide the alternatives, and we have not. So the result is going to be a car. And so until we provide alternatives, which the city has chosen not to spend that kind of money, and neither is Sandag and neither is anybody else, we're going to have cars.
So certainly we're in a chicken and egg situation, right? Until you establish a node and density around areas that could support transit. You can't put transit because there's not enough users. That's a whole different discussion, I think. I fall back to if you created a parking pass program for that street, those apartment residents would just go get parking passes. I mean, unless we're willing today to say an apartment dweller is less worthy of the parking pass than a homeowner, and I think state law is just, the law is against us on that one. I don't think that's the right way to go. I don't see how it's kind of chasing our tail if a parking permit zone was created there. All those people would be eligible to get permits.
Someone has to lead, someone has to go first. And if we're going to allow these developments because of state law, as the first person talked about, then why don't we go to NC North County Transit and say you have to put a bus line there? I mean, someone has to make a decision to deal with the density. If not, then our code is just going to force the neighbors to come back to city council. My concern is the code doesn't address the future impacts that we are passing here as a commission. And so we're kind of leaving it, we're kicking the can. And I agree with you, I don't want to privatize the streets. But without us coming up with some suggestions or some ideas to solve the problem that
we know is coming, and we already have seen on the
Well, I'm
existing.
going to call you on this. You pointed out the problem, but I can't picture what sort of language you might insert here to do this
I don't
thing
have, I
without
don't
being
have, I don't have the
discriminatory.
language.
I mean, I even like an idea. I'm not getting it. I don't see how this is a pretty simple snippet of code. It's, now we've defined things. Now we've got objective values. We can decide whether something's impacted or not. I was most interested in the discussion of how would a zone be created. I mean, because I can picture people, politically active people in a wealthy neighborhood creating a tiny little zone that just protects them and no one else. And
We've already
I
s-
don't
and we've
want
seen
that
that.
to happen.
And we've seen that.
And yeah, and so that's my main concern. It's like now, you were unfortunately missed our last meeting, but I pointed out that every one of these new housing developments that goes in and brings in residents, those are Encinitas residents. Those are our people. We may not have wished for them to move in originally, but once they're here, man. They're one of us. So we take care of them, and I'm not going to support anything that blocks their access to these streets. I mean, if it gets to the point where these.
Is there parking on Piraeus right now?
Oh, not on Piraeus. Am I going to support people illegally parking on a no parking zone? No, that's absurd.
So,
Should Piraeus should work be done on Piraeus in the next 3 years it's going to take for this project to move forward? I mean, I mentioned this frequently. It's like the city kind of inherited these responsibilities. We are going to have our infrastructure in place in time for these residents to move in. The state gave us the mandate to do this, but gave us no money to do it. So we are in the same boat as almost every other city that's been hit with these large requirements. So the houses are coming. They're not going to be in a year or 2 years or 3 years, and it may be that the city is going to have to postpone other grander aspirations they had for other projects in order to do these necessary infrastructure projects instead. So I'm approaching this every time these come in front of us. It's our job to say what should be done. And Piraeus Piraeus should have had sidewalks all the way along like 20 years ago. It's got enough frontage. I think it could be turned into a more narrow 2-lane road with speed humps and a walking path and bike paths, and it would be a jewel of the city again. We could do that. Probably wouldn't even cost as much money as I'm afraid some of these projects could. It's fixable. But the problem is the road. The problem isn't the residents at Piraeus Point. I mean, so I don't know. That's all I can say about that. Susan?
I think one of the things we need to look at is these numbers. I do agree, by the way, about keeping public streets, public access, and that's important to preserve. I'm curious about the 25% and the 95% being arrived at, I don't know how, arbitrarily, or the surveys you did. I kind of feel like on my own street, if I looked out and saw it was 95% full, I'd be sort of horrified. So I'm wondering if that's a bit of a high number. I think that it might be different in different areas of the city as far as 25% or 40% or 50% or, I'm not sure if those numbers are arrived at based on this one area, if it's going to be a precedent then for, like, if we have zoning, parking in other areas. I also think that as the city is inevitably growing and having growing pains due to the state mandates on affordable housing, we have no real way to stop it. And so it is going to happen. I think that we probably need to look at other cities and consider what are other policies, and if there are more broad or variations that accommodate different kinds of parking in different areas of cities within a certain number of blocks of a commercial area or within a certain number of blocks of oceanfront property. You know, looking at it in terms of where is it happening, I think we maybe want to take a little bit more big picture view. But I definitely agree about preserving public access for the public and protecting the communities from having being burdened by not being able to use their own street. If they're going to have, let's say, their child has an event, birthday or whatever, and they invite the family over, they want to park a few cars on the street. And if the street's 95% full, it is kind of a problem. So I don't know, you know, in terms of safety, you think about things like a family get-together, a family reunion or something, or a child's party, and you don't want to have to walk with toddlers several blocks away over to this location. So I don't know, 95% seems a bit high to me. I'm not sure how other commissioners
I'm actually,
see it.
now that you've said it, Susan, I'm thinking about 95%. That's no parking at all. That's downtown Encinitas during the dinner hour. That's no parking. That's you driving around for an hour hoping to find a place. I mean, it could be, you know, 80% might be a reasonable number. I mean, I think there's, Abe, is there any like standards for like, in order to have like a good continuous flow of people coming and going, is there a certain percentage of open spaces that is desirable?
Yeah, like a parking level of service. Unfortunately, not our calculation was pretty simple. There wasn't any other city that we could find around that had similar numbers. My discussion with our team was that a block is usually about 400, 440 feet, and it's usually around 20 parking spaces. 95 means in one block there's still one parking available. And if I want to get to a business in one block, or if it's residence, for example, in one block there are houses, if I can park in that block of my destination, I'm fine. That's why 19 out of 20 would be 95%. That was our assumption for that 95.
Right.
So if there are 20 spaces back to back, there is one available, I could find parking, basically.
Feels like that'd be almost more proper for more like a commercial or semi-commercial area. I just feel for residential, and that is what we're talking about, right?
Yes, it would be, I guess, a busy neighborhood. If you see the whole block filled with cars,
Yeah,
you would
I
say
mean,
like, yeah.
If we're still dealing with recommendations here, I would recommend that that number be lower.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just because, you know, you need to have, especially, you know, people coming and going, you know, here's,
I'd caution, okay, so a lot of us have stated a preference not to have parking zones at all and privatizing the streets. And so the lower you bring that number, the more
likely
areas
it'll
of the
happen.
city feel that they meet that requirement. The truth of the matter is that the city council still has the discretion to approve anything, right? They showed that in the last parking zone that they approved. So I don't have a problem with the number being too high. I liken it to our current parking ratios that anticipate those the peak hours, like the commercial parking set for Black Friday. So every other day of the year, we sit with massive parking lots that are open, but we, heaven forbid, we don't have parking on the busiest day, shopping day, right?
Yeah.
So I get it. We all have a Super Bowl party at our house or a birthday party, and there will be times where that impacts the parking. But if we size all of our parking around us so that every neighbor can have a party at the same time, you know, we'll just be living in parking lots. So I'm comfortable with that number. It sounds like there is some kind of reason about why they came up with that number. It doesn't seem totally random to me. And I kind of like that it's a high standard to meet.
mm-hmm. Well, cool. I'm actually okay with that. I'm just picturing, you know, I live not far from the Leucadia Farmers Market, and as they lost their spillover lot, Now, people are like 10 minutes away from the market or parked in front of my house. It's like, oh my God, people in front of my house. You know, it seems a little shocking the first time I saw it, but now it's normal. You know, I'm used to it when the street fair happens and people going to downtown are parked all the way along the tracks and up my street, again, on Orpheus. It's a bit of a truck, but people will do it. Inconvenience is not, I totally agree. Planning for peak usage is, you know, yes, it's going to be hard to park during the special event, whatever it happens to be. But, so I'm not married to the number. I just think I feel it doesn't really have any data attached, or has the one per block, you know, but just thinking residential, people aren't parking straight in, they're parking parallel, you know, well, you know your numbers. I trust your math in this one. The one I'm really concerned about, though, is I'd love to have something in the language here to make gerrymandering impossible. I don't want people to draw special little districts with certain people excluded. And that's why I was thinking, you know, maybe, you know, X amount of 100 feet as the crow flies so that we don't get to nip anyone out. We can protect our neighborhood, but we have to protect people in a certain radius as well. I don't know. That's one possible solution. I leave it to you to come up with others. And I bet you the people at Mobility will probably have something to say on this as well.
So I have a question about that. Is this, if the zone was going to be coming to city council, is it something that would be noticed to people within a certain radius?
For this specific case, we did notify all the residents impacted up to Via Cantabria and also the apartment complex. This is not a good case to, I'm hearing Chair's concern. This case is kind of surrounded by businesses and non-residential areas that we could notify everybody. I can see, let's say it happens in the Highlands, like right behind us in Cornish, for example, something happens and the library is impacting the residents now. One block of Cornish wants to establish permit. Does this go to the next block of Cornish? Does it go behind Cornish? So I can see that happening. Maybe we don't need to finalize a number now, but it can be the input from the commission that wherever qualifies based on this criteria, the permit parking zone that's established should be within 5 minutes of walking off that permit parking zone or 10 minutes of walking within that permit parking zone. That way we can say, okay, this is an area impacted, but we're not eliminating people who are 10 minutes away to park here. They can still park. If their houses doesn't have enough parking, they can park here and walk 10 minutes. What that number is, I don't know, but yeah.
Our GIS maps can.
Yeah, we can
that
create a boundary of walking of n minutes of walking distance to this segment that did qualify.
That's a good solution for me.
Versus just distance. So minutes
Sorry?
minutes versus distance. So 1,000 feet versus 10 minutes. I might walk slower than you. I'm just trying to be a horse's patoot, but at the same time.
Maybe there's a conversion factor, right? If you walk 2 miles an hour, 2.5 miles an hour.
Our standard traffic speed is 3 feet per second. For various reasons, it's mostly ADA. Like the way we adjust our crossing distances at traffic signals is 3 feet per second. We can convert any number. The reason I said minutes is that if we go radius, you know, the roads might have, you know, different, like if there's an L-shaped road and if it's a straight road, it would, you know, lead to a different type of, but yeah, I would say I'm hopeful, praying that we're not looking at 10 of these a year. So if it's just one every other year or something, I'll figure it out. Hopefully it's not going to get to a point where we have, you know,
I
West
just
LA
like,
type
we're putting it in
situation.
the code, so I like to have, you know, I like to think past our tenure and on to the next people, and what will they make of it? It's like, oh, geez, it says we have to do this, so.
Yeah, if you include the recommendation in the motion, I'll make sure that when it goes to council, I have some alternatives in there that council can pick from.
Fantastic.
If you wanted to include language, you could refer to walking distance as opposed to a time, so walking distance of X amount.
Mm-hmm.
And what is our notice provision, 500 feet? So if we're drawing a circle, is the city code notice, if we're going to do a parking zone, what is our current code for noticing the people that aren't going to be in the zone? Is it 500 feet if we're going to establish, if someone's making an application for a parking permit, and they do it to the radius that is approved by city council, whether it's distance or time or distance, what is our notice provision for people that are going to be, to your point earlier, Chair, across the street?
So
From the
state
line.
law does not mandate that we have a notice provision. Now, certainly, we could include that in our code if we wish to. We can always do more than the minimum of state law.
So, to your point, if I'm across the street, I didn't know that the parking permit was going on because I wasn't noticed. So if I'm going to draw a circle around my little parking area, and I unfortunately am across the street from the circle, how do I find out about it unless we notice them?
Oh, yeah. And I'll also, if we do walking distance, and now we then tack on 500 or however many foot radius around it, I guess that's, GIS can pull that off.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, if that's a suggestion, if we're going to have a step required, then we should let people who are going to be impacted by that know about it.
Other jurisdictions where I work use a 300-foot radius for noticing of projects. And
Is that what we use for traffic projects?
We don't have a CPP the way planning has. I think planning goes radius, right, Anna? Goes 500 feet radius. But again, this is open. We can do walking distance, as Scott mentioned, or we could do radius. I'm fine either way.
I think we're talking about two different things, though. And I would support, Bob, in your idea of adding a noticing provision so that if a parking zone is being created, residents within 300 feet or 500 feet of that zone would be notified that that's on the agenda, that's out
That's
there.
all. Just
So I think
transparency.
that's one item, and then I think the other item that we're hearing is a concern for how the boundary of this zone would be created, and that's where we're talking about a 5-minute walk or a 10-minute walk that would permit you to use a permit for that zone.
So I have a question about that, about how that works. So a 5 or 10-minute walk, what is your center? Like, from where to
so
where? From
what
like
I-
one end to the other, or, what?
So I would think we would say, this is the protected area, this, like, 2 blocks this way and 2 blocks that way. We've got 4 square blocks. That's our protected area. So anyone who can get a permit would be within 5 minutes of that area, or 10 minutes of that
the
area.
proposed zone.
So the zone would be drawn, and then, the people who were able to park in that zone and get permits expand from that zone. So that's the way I'm picturing it.
Okay, so from the perimeter.
Exactly. So instead of drawing a fixed outline and then saying everyone in here can park and everyone out there can't, and, I think that one, I can picture that working. I can picture the notification working there too, because that would actually draw the new zone, and it would be more bulbous than it would be otherwise if somebody had tried to nitpick it. And now from that zone that we can say, however many feet out, those people should be notified, hey, be careful about parking here.
So we have the area so we have 3 areas to make sure I'm understanding it right. So we have one area that I survey, 2 streets, 3 streets, 4 streets, depending on what kind of petition we get. We survey them, these 3, 4, 2 streets qualify, have this parking issue, they're impacted by the parking, and then 30% of them are non-residents that are parking there. From the boundary of these 2, 3 streets, we go off 5 minutes of walking. Wherever it reaches, it becomes a bigger boundary. That's our permit parking zone. And then 300 feet off of the boundary of the second boundary is who we notify. Is that what everybody's?
Yeah, that's my
That's
understanding,
what
and
my
my
understanding
suggestion
is.
is to go to 500 feet because that's what we do for other planning issues. So
Yeah.
why make it, I understand some cities do 300, but
I'm in favor of one more stamp or two.
So I will point out, in our existing ordinance, it does indicate that a public hearing is required and it has to be noticed. What that does not state in that chapter is what the hearing requirements are, and we're furiously finding out, is there an overarching rule that says, hey, how much notice is required? But it already requires notice. So we're trying to figure out what that might be.
That's the notice of the public hearing, like a typical notice, not
Correct.
not to the residents, directly like a mailer within 500 feet.
In this case, we did send mailers out.
Okay.
We didn't
We did.
just assume that the city council notice is the public hearing. We did send mailers out in both languages. But this is a good idea. We can include that in the language, that after the evaluations created that boundary for the potential permit parking zone, 500 feet out of that boundary would also get the notice of potential discussions of this item at council. We can do that.
So I'm still, I'm sorry, I'm dealing with graphics a lot. So I'm picturing, let's say we got like a 3x3 block. This is protected. Permit parking here. We say a 5-minute walk around there, people can get permits. Are they getting permits for that area that's 5 minutes walk around, or are they getting permits for that 3x3 block?
That 3x3 block is my understanding.
That's my understanding. I just,
You would be able to park in there and walk 5 minutes to your home.
Yep, I just, I wasn't sure, I mean, the way we discussed it, it could have been interpreted either way. So I wanted to make clear that, hey, this is how I think I understood it, and I think everyone else here, and you as well, but I wanted out. So, because I talked about that tiny little area that bulbed out into this thing, and I think I'm comfortable with our what appears to be almost consensus here. Should we, is this something, Abe, is this something you need in the form of a motion, or is this something you need just guidance from us?
Well, I have a question.
Go for it.
So
Mine was a question,
for the
too.
CPP, the citizen participation, anyone in the city can attend, right?
Yeah,
Even though it's noticed somewhat smaller?
I go to a bunch of these things. I'm not sure.
I can answer that question. Yes. Anyone can attend the CPP meetings. So if, let's say, somebody hears it from across another neighborhood and they would like to attend, they are able to attend. And then anyone can request to be added to the mailing list that is not within the 500-foot radius.
Because it kind of seems like a citywide issue as we come up with new policy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I actually get most of these by mail, and I can't remember where I found it on the website, but there was a place I could say, let me know about this, and that. And I just checked them all. And if I can find the page again, I'm going to send the link out there and recommend everyone check it because, you know.
So I think what we'll do, if, I think I've heard the general consensus, there is some language in our code, it realizes it's a different section, it's section 30.01.070, that includes a lot of the same language, and we can go through that and see, in the recommendation to the city council, we can essentially see if that language works. I'm skimming through it, it does include a 500-foot rule, it does require publication. We can figure out whether those exact rules would apply here, but that might be something, rather than putting it into the code with all the rules, we could just cross-reference that, or at least come up with something that works.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. I mean, for me, it's the radius. It's the social equity issue more than anything else. That's the only real recommendation I had from the very get-go.
I'd make a motion, if you,
Go for it.
that we support the amendments or edits as presented with 2 additional comments, that you look at a boundary area that includes a 5-minute residence within 5-minute walking distance of the boundary, and that you include a requirement for notification within 500-foot radius to be coordinated with whatever current noticing requirements are already in place at the city.
I'll second.
All right. Any discussion on this? Or should we go straight to a vote? Let's, Dina's back. Oops.
Thank you very much.
All right, this motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Abe. I appreciate all your hard work. And that finishes this case. And who's here for the Roxy? All right. Give me a second to switch pieces of paper here.
You're the bad kid in the background.
Yep, I know you. I know you're a back row kind of girl. So, welcome. Let's see. The next up is the Roxy expansion, case number multi 4782-2021. This is located at 509, 511, 515, and 517 South Coast Highway 101. This is a public hearing to consider a minor use permit modification, design review, coastal development permit for the expansion of an existing restaurant, the Roxy, with alcohol service into the adjacent northern tenant space and including a facade change to match the existing facade. Do we have any disclosures this evening? No? Hearing none. Jay, we begin with a staff report by Senior Planner Jay DeCozo.
Give me a moment here. Great. Good evening, Commissioners. This project is called the Roxy Expansion, case number 004782-2021 multi. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the restaurant. Restaurant was first established in 1978 as the Roxy Restaurant Ice Cream, a longtime icon downtown. Roxy is one tenant of an existing two-story, approximately 5,800 square foot inline commercial structure along South Coast Highway 101 that was constructed prior to this city's incorporation. It's located about mid-block along the east side of South Coast Highway 101, and there's a staircase accessed from 101 that separates the front portion of the two suites that provides access to the second-story tenants. There's a restaurant just to the north of it, known as Maurizio's for reference. Primary access to Roxy is available from 101 or the rear parking lot that is shared with the North County Transit District behind the restaurant. As you know, it's in an established downtown area. The properties north and south of 101 are zoned downtown Encinitas Commercial Mixed 1. Beyond the commercial areas, there's a mix of single-family and multifamily residences, including the City Hall, and a variety of architectural styles, ages. And as you know, like I said, again, the parking lot behind it is run by the North County Transit District. For the Roxy expansion, there are 3 discretionary permits. The first, the most primary, is the minor use permit modification, which would modify a 2018 application that you're familiar with that allowed for live entertainment and dancing. This current application would expand the restaurant operation. While the restaurant operation itself is permissible, we're talking about the expansion of the Type 47 ABC license to expand alcohol service into the adjacent tenant suite that was formerly retail. As part of that, we have to reconfigure the floor plan for both tenant suites to recognize the alcohol service area for ABC. Part of that, allowed by right, is to operate a small juice and smoothie shop from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. typically, daily, located in the front 177 square feet of the new tenant suite and a speakeasy behind it. The proposed alcohol service is also proposed to match the alcohol license approved by ABC. The second discretionary permit, is the administrative design review permit, is to match the facade of the adjacent suite to that of Roxy's current facade. And the last permit is the coastal development permit, simply because the project's in the coastal zone. Whoops. Oh, I lost a floor plan. Oh, there it is, sorry. Here's the existing floor plan, which is identified on the left, which is the demolition plan, and the second would be the new floor plan. with the expansion and the identified areas beneath. The red is the existing floor plan. Green is the floor plan into which it would expand into. The northwest corner, the 177 feet, if you look on the right profile, is the juice bar kitchen with the speakeasy behind, consisting of a waiting area, a new bar, booths, high top lounge, and then towards the back you have new bathroom and a cooler. And then next to the cooler is the actual entry that patrons can cross into either space into the main Roxy restaurant. And the reconfiguration would move the center bar along the northern wall. As you can see, it increases in size, but generally the existing dance floor, the existing stage is located in the same place, centered. And with the larger area, a larger kitchen is also needed. Oops. The second part is the facade change. And with it, the proposed facade modifications, would duplicate the facade of the existing Roxy with the existing green jade-colored tile and full-length windows with transom windows above, all framed with a brown coffee-colored wood. It's important to note that I also provided a memorandum that in the plans provided to you previously in the memorandum today that we omitted accidentally the black awnings that exist. So those two sheets would be included into the record. No black awning is proposed for the expanded suite. Overall, the key project features are that no new floor area, therefore there's no change in the parking supply. The Type 47 ABC license would authorize the on-site consumption of beer, wine, and distilled spirits in the restaurant throughout the entire restaurant. Sorry for the duplicate phrasing there. All windows and doors shall be closed by 10 p.m. Food and service shall be available during all hours of operation. Live entertainment and dancing in the main dining area only. And if the applicant desires, more performers and/or dancing entertainment in the speakeasy would require a future minor use permit modification and a noise study. The minor use permit modification includes, as stated, a request to align their hours approved by ABC. So the original ABC license allows them to serve from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m., but the use permits that have been approved for the site limited their hours and did not afford them the full at 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. So Roxy is proposing an alignment between the two. Their hours are generally remaining the same, 6 a.m. to 12 on most days of the week, and the reservation for New Year's Day. So they're requesting an expansion of their hours from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. on Fridays and Saturdays. It's important to note that this is what the use permit, this is what the alcohol services hours are. Their actual business hours of operation. They choose to operate, I believe they open at 8. I'll have to look back in my notes. Now, as part of this application, they also serve alcohol. They are allowed, based on a 2018 Planning Commission resolution, to serve alcohol in the public right-of-way. However, that's limited until such time that the business ownership has changed, and that is a deviation from the standard code section, which prohibits alcohol service in the right-of-way. But recently, during COVID, there was a city council resolution, the sidewalk cafe policy that was updated that would allow alcohol within the public right-of-way with the issuance of a use permit. So this application includes a request to continue the alcohol service within their allowed exterior patio area. So the Planning Commission is asked to make a decision to approve, that is, to maintain the exterior alcohol service or deny the request. The difference between the two is that if you choose to approve the maintenance of exterior alcohol service, they are no longer limited by the change in business operation, and they're allowed to do so simply because of the 2022 City Council resolution. If you deny the request, then they are still limited to the 2018 use permit determination and would lose that ability to serve in the right-of-way until such time the business ownership changes. The resolution presented before you assumes that you would approve this request, and if you choose to deny this request, we can come back at a later time to adjust the, to amend the resolution. citizen participation newsletter, and a public notice was mailed according to the municipal code, and no comments were received. Therefore, staff recommends approval of Roxy's expansion because the restaurant is allowed by right and alcohol service is accessory to the principal restaurant use. Conditions of approval are in place that would not have an adverse impact on the neighborhood, and staff recommends approval subject to your decision regarding alcohol service in the right-of-way, conditions of approval in the attached resolution, and the memorandum depicting the black awnings on the correct elevations. And that concludes my staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I'm going to start off real quick with a question I've got. The City Council 2022-28, is that the emergency declaration, or is that?
No, that is not.
So that's now anyone who's got a restaurant on a sidewalk like this?
Yes.
Has anyone applied, and who?
No.
So no one has taken advantage of this yet?
No, as far as I know, no. Yes.
Okay. Why'd we do it? Well, usually you would think somebody would be pushing for it. That's why it would happen. So this, I really should have done more research on that particular one, because really, for me, this is the crux of this matter, and it's so important I printed this page twice. Page 16, which is, do we now, because it's been legal non-conforming, the alcohol serving use on the patio, and I remember this was also early on in my tenure, where the ability to do that legal non-conforming thing, it was written into one of the previous decision, it went with the ownership of the business, and once it changes hands, then that goes away, but now we actually have a vehicle to do this now. I remember when we had you in front of us last time, we were talking about, actually, here, am I deliberating here? Let me stop this there. Any more questions for Jay?
I have a question. Jay, could you
Back
pull
to
up the floor plan, please? And could you point to or outline to me where you connect from the existing restaurant into the new expansion?
It's back here. Do you see, I can't zoom in, but there is a door there, if you zoom in.
So if you're...
Well, it also leads you to another bathroom, too. It leads you to a hallway, to an exit to the rear parking lot, but then you walk by the cooler and another restroom before you head into the lounge.
So it's kind of hidden in there. Is that the?
Well, it is a speakeasy.
It is a speakeasy. So there's from the 101, you don't really see it. You have to go all the way to the back.
Well, you can still enter through the juice bar. There is a door and a waiting area there. Yes.
I know. I've seen a couple of places like this downtown where it's like, they hide it.
Yeah.
And you have to go through like a coat closet to get to the.
It adds to the allure.
Yep. Questions?
I have a question. Can you explain again, based on Kevin's questions regarding the alcohol use in the right-of-way, can you explain just that again and kind of take us through what is currently being done and then what the different decisions would mean?
Sure. So here's a little bit of the background. So with the adoption of the municipal code, section 928, no serving in the right-of-way. That's prohibited possession of open container public property. Then in 2018, there was a condition, and actually it goes back further than that. It's in the staff report if you really want me to go further back. It was 1997, actually, where 1997, this is on page 3, Planning Commission Resolution 9745 authorized the expansion of on-sale beer and wine consumption within the existing enclosed outdoor seating area authorized by the 1996 encroachment permit. But it was reaffirmed in that, 97, right? And then in 2012, there was a city council resolution when the first sidewalk cafe policy was adopted. And at that time, there were 2 restaurants that were serving in the right-of-way. One was Roxy and the other one was Maurizio's. And they both were levied the condition of approval to allow them to continue serving in the right-of-way until there was a change of business ownership. So that's been going on since 2012. I don't know when Maurizio's might have received their ability. Then 2018, that condition for change of business ownership was reaffirmed when they came in for the floor plan modifications, increased hours of operations, and the live music and dancing. And then 2020, they received a COVID permit, right, to provide restaurant service in the right-of-way. And then they received a public right-of-way permit, which then supersedes that sidewalk permit. And then that 2022 resolution basically saying you may now overall comprehensively provide service of alcohol in the right-of-way in 2022. So knowing that there was that limitation of the change in business ownership, staff thought that this might be their opportunity to remove that limitation and go ahead and align themselves with the city council resolution. And if you choose not to agree, if you choose otherwise, then they are just limited to the 2018 resolution. And if there's a change in business ownership, they would have to, they lose that. I presume they might have to reapply again.
Okay, so I have a question. So how does this, okay, the public right-of-way, pre-COVID would mean seating that's like adjacent to the restaurant before you get to the sidewalk?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So I know there was the expansion of the public right-of-way in 2020 to allow for the service on the other side of the sidewalks.
That's correct.
Is that also then considered the public right-of-way?
That is in the public right-of-way also.
Okay, but the city council, I don't know what it is, an ordinance, temporary ordinance, that has an end date, correct?
Yes, and that's
Okay.
related to COVID.
Right, so I know they extended it. What is the current end date for the service on the other side of the sidewalk? I don't know what else to call that.
You mean in the parking spaces?
Right.
I believe, Anna, that's related to,
December
31.
31st, 2023.
Thank you.
Is the end of that one.
Okay.
And I just want to be clear that this request is only for the sidewalk dining along the frontage of the building and nothing else.
Okay, that was,
just under the awning, if you could look at the, where they currently dine.
all right, that was pretty much the crux to my question.
Okay. Sorry for the misunderstanding.
No, it's great, thank you.
Thank you both, because I was going to ask that question. I was like waiting for my chance. Do we have any other questions for staff before we go to public comment?
I have one.
Go for it then, Bob.
Do any of these affect the dining in the rear?
The dining in the rear is, they are currently working with code enforcement to get that permitted.
So
That is a separate issue.
And if Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the COVID related. It
Oh, I'm
has
sorry,
nothing
yes.
to do with this permit.
That is correct, yes. That is related to their COVID permit.
okay, so it's nothing to do with what's in front of us. It's not connected to anything that we're voting on tonight.
That is correct. That is
Yes,
a complete
thank you.
separate permit under COVID.
Cool. If there's no more questions, I'm going to open public comment, and let's hear from the applicant if you'd like. I think, is it Shane?
Hi, I'm Bart Smith,
Oh, hi,
the
Bart.
architect for the project with DZM Partners here in Encinitas. We do have the ownership group that represents the owner, Soja, and then the business ownership there. Jay did a fine job on his report, so we're just available for questions if you have any.
Cool.
I did want to clarify that the alcohol area that Jay's talking about is also under the awnings, but it's also enclosed by railings. It's just that little strip right by the front of the restaurant. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Bart.
I have a question.
Okay, Bart, stick around. We have a question here already.
Don't sit down. Could you describe maybe the operation, if you were coming to get dinner at the Roxy and you wanted to go to the Speakeasy after dinner, would you exit back out to the sidewalk and then up through the juice bar, or would you be taken back through the back door through the kitchen?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, hi guys, I'm Paula.
Hi.
So obviously, like, there's a lot of things that are still kind of in process as far as like figuring out the actual ins and outs of everything. No pun intended, right? The ins and outs. But we do expect and anticipate the majority of the dining, because it is going to be such a small capacity on that side, to be reservations only. So in theory, it'll kind of be treated like you will be able to go from your table to the other one if there's the availability. But if there's, if it's reservation based, just because there's, all that kind of stuff. But there will be access, like your server will be able to lead you to your table, kind of a thing. We're trying to figure out how to make one reservation then lead to the second reservation.
And there'd be a second host station? You
Yeah.
could come in either door?
Yeah.
Depending
There'd be a
on where you're
host,
ordering.
there'd be one for Roxy, there'll be one for the Speakeasy, and then there'll actually be one sort of in the go-between as like a maitre d', we'll say.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question for the architect. Is the ingress and egress as proposed code?
Yeah,
I
it will
don't
meet
know the
code. Yes, definitely. It'll have the proper 2 exits and everything for the amount of users and everything.
Does it count as an exit for the existing facility in terms of the distancing? Or are we talking about, because I have to go through that door, past the cooler, and then there's an exit out the back?
Well, there's an exit out the front through the juice bar, and there's an exit out the back to the alley
Right?
in the Speakeasy. So we've got 2 exits there, and then Roxy itself has 2 of its own exits from the front and the rear. So,
Right, so you have to go through here, and then you're in that way, and then there's a door out that way. So under the word bath and storage, is there, that's the door into the cooler?
there's a door that leads out of the
It just looks,
Speakeasy to the exterior.
It looks like the door from the cooler is blocking under the word storage, because that door goes open. I'm just concerned, and I don't know the codes of
Right.
ingress and egress. I'm just concerned we're putting another path that appears to be, I get the idea of a speakeasy, but it just appears to be, I don't know how to do it any better, but I'm just asking the question, is that code compliant
Well,
in the back?
well, 2 things. One, all the doors are depicted as open, right? So the other thing is the building department preliminarily had no concerns, but they did say, go ahead and if approved, you may submit for building permits. So they did get a overview of the property.
I'm going to ask Steve the question. So under the word bath and storage, the door is swinging out. If that door happens to be swinging out in a crisis, is that a problem? Should that door swing in?
They meet code because either room, the Speakeasy side has 2 exits without using that passage.
Got it.
And the Roxy has 2 exits without using that passage. Also, if it came up in building permit, I think they could swing that door into the storage
Right.
because the storage doesn't have an occupancy that would require panic hardware.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Correct.
I'm scared I'm running out, and I.
Yeah. But I think that definitely would get
Looked at.
caught at the building department.
Okay, thank you. What are the current,
Remember, now this is the applicant presentation, and now we've paused to ask questions of the applicant and the experts here. There's still probably other speakers here to come, so let's, go for it.
what are your current hours of operation?
So Roxy's current hours are Saturday and Sunday, we open for brunch at 10, and then during the week, we open at 11 o'clock for lunch. We are open like 10 o'clock Monday through Wednesday, 11 on Thursday, and then 12:30 on Friday and Saturday. Sundays, we're usually out of there by 9.
And is the application to open and serve alcohol at 6?
That's what our current license is. So
But you don't do that, so are you?
we have for like certain runs, right, like the turkey trot and things like that. We have had that happen, and we are hoping for a lot of private event status with this new space, and just kind of being able to utilize those in all those open hours is really all it is.
And the 8 a.m. comes with the ABC, the 6 a.m. comes with the ABC 47 license?
Is it? Yeah, it's
Or
6.
is it
Yeah.
a city of?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's just with ABC.
An ABC?
Yeah, and that's been the way that it's been. Gosh, Soja, how long has that been?
For a long time.
Yeah, 82.
Just to let you know, the ABC license is included as one of your attachments.
Well,
with the
and
exact phrasing.
I'll ask a question. I got you here now. Paul, you might be best for this. So the speakeasy, a little more bar-like. We also have the 50% requirement for 50% food, 50% alcohol-based things. You're still going to feel comfortable falling within that?
Yeah, so because it is such a much smaller kind of capacity, and we're not doing the live entertainment like we are, we do anticipate it to be much more of like a lounge feel, where you're coming, you're grabbing 1 or 2 drinks, and you're getting some of these like small nosh sort of items versus full kitchen dinner menu kind of a style of thing. But we don't anticipate there being any issue with the 50-50 rule. And it is also important just to note with regards to the cooler, that cooler is actually primarily for cold storage. So it's not something that will be being accessed frequently throughout the course of the day or night.
Cool. I have no real questions. No? Let's move on to public comment. If you want to come back and respond to anything that's said, we'll have you back up. How many speakers do we have, Dina?
We just have one, and that's Scott Campbell.
Scott Campbell.
Okay. So it's kind of weird when I come up twice. Do I have to introduce myself and say where I live again?
No. We know
My
who
name's
you
Scott
are.
Campbell. I live in
Hold
Encinitas
on.
District
The
1.
mouse is not cooperating. Oh, there we go.
And hopefully I have a PowerPoint show. There we go. I'm asking you to vote no on this today. In general, I support this project, but there's some issues, and with these issues, you can't vote with good conscience, as the previous speaker said. You got to have some guts. The requirements for this project, Exhibit B, blah, 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 blah. The SC1, specific condition says, continue to operate in full compliance with the City of Encinitas Sidewalk Cafe policy. Roxy Cafe is currently out of compliance. There's been complaints lodged, and I believe they've been fixed, but there's been other complaints that haven't been lodged, and we're going to get to those. Specifically, the other violation of the site plan, now they may have changed this, and I apologize if I'm incorrect, but storage of tables and chairs and lighting. I brought up lighting a couple weeks ago. This actually has a specific code. The site plan, once again, it may have changed, said 5 tables, 12 chairs. This morning at 5:45 this morning, 11 chairs, 10 chairs, 44 stools. That's 54 chairs. The heaters, 8 said 6. It's a violation. You think I'd be good at this thing? The lighting. They talk about covered lights, and they talk about actual candle power. There's an app on my phone, and it works with a sensor, and it's really light. It's accurate. If you put a lighter to it from 1 foot, it measures 1 unit. It's pretty good. Anyways, pointing that thing at the light, you can see the difference between the different angles. It clearly is more than 1 candle power. And there's a string of lights. And you can actually see in the background lights from the other places too. This is a violation of the code, the Sidewalk Cafe code. All these places are in violation, but specifically Roxy's here today. So I'm sorry that, did I miss one? Oh, I did. A storage of chairs. The code says the stuff's supposed to be stored inside. Now, granted, there's a lot of chairs and tables. That's huge. It's not really reasonable, but the code says to store inside, out of sight. It's not done. Again, none of these places are doing it. Actually, very few. Some are in compliance. Interestingly, this is really isn't a big deal. The restaurant in front of the hat store, specifically they mentioned, we're not going to put any street dining in front of that. And why is that? Because another restaurant is using that space. It's so confusing. But anyways, I ask you to vote no today. In general, I'm in favor of this. I think it's probably going to be really nice, but today you can't just because of this. Let's go back to that first page. Right here, SCB2. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. No more? Closing public comment? Oh, yeah. Applicant, do you want to come up and opening public comment? Please come back and.
So I do always appreciate when people speak their opinion, and I think that there's something to be said about kind of how we run things here, and I appreciate what you have to say. I appreciate that you like what we have to do. On the issue that is sidewalk cafes, it is a problem, and that is why code enforcement came out last week and corrected all the lights, and that is why, because it's a problem, right? But all of those images and all of those photos that you showed actually is for the COVID expansion patios that everybody put in, which is also our back parking lot. And code enforcement is actually currently working with each and every single individual business to get their new updated site plans, because that site plan was put in like May of 2020. And so obviously it's out of date, right? We didn't even have the parklets approved at that point through the city. So there's lots of changes that are in process, and I've personally been dealing with a lot of the people up at commission to figure out exactly, because we technically have 3 different patios and 3 different ways of doing, so to try and figure out to make sure that we have the right plans into the city to make that happen. And I can show you emails if you want to see it. But the city is doing their part, and all the businesses on the 101 are also doing theirs. That's all.
Thank you, Paula. Yeah. Now I'll close public comment. And I think, does staff wish to respond to anything that's been brought up? Or we'll just go straight to deliberations? We'll give you a chance first.
You can start deliberating. I have no comment.
Okay. I'll jump off here because, like, geez, it feels like the entire time I've been a planning commissioner, Roxy's been like up front and center. I've frequently in the past I've voted, but with my gut to an extent. I like good neighbors. I know who they are. I remember back in 2018 when Roxy was in front of us, you weren't allowed to dance in there. And Roxy's a good neighbor. If you go there, the musicians playing, I'm assuming you're going to set it up this way again. They're looking at a decibel meter up ahead of them, and they know not to go over that. And, it's a tricky one. You're right in the middle of an area that's a lot of people have been very hot and bothered about with alcohol proliferation, yada, yada, yada. But Roxy's and Mr. Peabody's both stand out as our premier local music venues. I remember when you came in 2018, I had a list of the 200-plus bands that had been there, and it was like 80% of them were literally from Encinitas. I mean, good bands, not just like anyone you could get. It's impressive. And so I, in this, I would support option, which one did you call it? Option 1, where we would basically eliminate the sidewalk alcohol usage tied to the ownership. I think we've got a way where it's not needed, and I'd rather it not be here. In terms of the code violations you brought up, Scott, it's like, they're code violations, I suppose. I mean, whether they would have been code violations if it was attached to their building. Is it a code violation with the COVID emergency responses? I don't know. Either way, it's a job for code enforcement. It's not up to me or anyone here, I don't think. I mean, we can use the bully pulpit to say something should be done. And I remember holding you to the midnight hours back then, and that was kind of the trend. Right now, I'm seeing the only other non-bar that is open past midnight is Home and Away. Lumberyard doesn't count anymore since they're pretty much gone. But again, I go with my feeling that betting on good neighbors, love what you're going to do with the place. Honestly, we didn't need another souvenir shop, whereas I like the idea of hopefully the smoothie shop will actually be Roxy ice cream again, because what the heck, why not? So anyway, you know my feelings here, and I'll pass this on to anyone else who wants to jump in. Anybody?
I didn't know if they had turns. I would echo mostly what Kevin has said. I like that this is a local restaurant. They've been a successful restaurant in our community for as long as I can think back. I don't see anything in the plans that give me concern about the expansion, and I would congratulate them for needing to expand or being able to expand. And I think we ought to try to support businesses that want to grow in our community.
No one else had anything to say? Go for it, Bob.
To staff on page 14 of 110,
Yes.
you list some of the other properties in the area that have different licenses. Could you explain to me the difference between a type 47 and a type 48 license?
Type 48 is typically a bar, if you want to put it that way, where there's no, like First Street Bar. That's a bar.
Okay.
Whereas 47, basically the way to remember is 47, yeah, it's a bar, because they both can serve food. But the difference is also minors are not allowed in a 48. And for example, First Street Bar and Beer Garden are two different entities.
Okay. My concern is the 6 a.m. start, alcohol serving at 6 a.m. I'm looking at the other type 47s. Would each alcohol, ABC 47 for Pena and Home 1969, formerly Home and Away, is the hours tied to the it says type 47, so those open from 3 p.m. to 12 a.m., 11 a.m. to 12 a.m., yet the same type 47 for Roxy as proposed, and that the owner has stated is in their permit allows them to serve at 6 a.m. So is that unique to each location and their permit with the ABC, even though they're both type 47?
Yes, that is correct. They are. Some of these, just for background, don't have a city use permit, but we are aware that they do have an old county. Some of these are just old county permits that have just continued through today.
And do we, as the city, limit their hours to serve, or is that a business decision for Pena to go between 3 p.m. and 12 a.m.?
It is a business decision.
But if we pull
based on the ABC permit that they have.
Based on the ABC permit?
That's correct.
Okay. So looking at all of these, and I guess this is based on a radius of, or is this just based on your?
These were known locations that were nearby that were beyond midnight in the downtown area.
Okay, would there be, all right, so my concern is opening up, even though it's in their permit, so that's this question for code, even though their permit allows for a 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. service, are we, the Planning Commission, and those at the City Council, do they limit the business hours? Who limits the business hours to serve the alcohol if the permit allows them to go from 6 a.m.?
I think the last time this was in front of us in 2018, I honestly can't remember why, but there was an argument made that it was 6 a.m. was not bad. I mean, honestly, I don't expect on a high rent district like this that they're suddenly going to decide to open up an early morning bar and drag things down. I think I can picture it special events, weekends, holidays, brunchy type things. It's about the only time I could picture it. I mean, we could have them open up later, but, you know, I don't know. I don't really even see the point. I don't think they're going to open at 6.
I'm just asking the ministerial question, who limits the hours, Planning Commission or City Council?
I think Planning Commission limits the hours. We've limited the hours on many, many projects. Well, for longest time, it was like 10 o'clock, man, 10 o'clock, you're done. And certain areas, we've gone up to 12, and we've always said, it's like, we'll see you again if it's justified to come in later. And, you know, here's a good example. Roxy's back, and, you know, asking for an extra hour on Friday and Saturday. And
Well,
they are.
they're asking for earlier hours.
No, they're asking for to stay open an hour later on Friday and Saturday. So right, currently, I think their service is limited to midnight.
As I understand it, Bob, their license allows them to serve at 6 a.m. They just choose not to open at 6 a.m.
Right.
And so they serve at, 8 a.m. or whatever 10 a.m.
Right.
whenever they actually
Well, so I
open.
was just curious. Early opening bars is one thing, but it sounds, clearly they have the right to do so. And they have chosen not to do that. And as part of their application, they're not asking to change the opening. They're asking to change the close.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I,
Sorry. The close has already been changed. It was already approved, the sheriff's department.
oh. Jay, what is the I thought I saw in your thing here that their hours are limited to 6 to 12, except for New Year's Eve, as I recall, till 1 a.m.
What does the current use permit for Roxy say for hours of operation is what
Oh,
the
yeah,
question is.
sorry for not being clear there.
Page 13.
Thank you, Anna.
So based on the 2018 resolution, right there in the middle row,
What page are you on?
oh, if you look at the screen, the monitor, currently the PC Planning Commission resolution allows them to go from 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. every day.
And
And at 1 for New Year's Eve.
for clarity, is that open or is that alcohol serving?
That is alcohol serving. They can choose whatever business hours they want, because restaurant is allowed by right, but you have to split that away from alcohol
Yeah.
service.
So when Paula said they're open till 12:30, didn't mean they were
Yeah,
violating the terms of their permit.
right.
The sheriff's department approved it, so when we were in, sorry, I know it's a public comment, can I comment?
Not really. We'll pull you up if we need to. Don't sweat it. It's,
Well, the license, so the sheriff.
I'm going to open public comment for a moment here. Paula, please come up to the mic.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, let's
So when
not.
we were in and we chatted, you said if you're good neighbors you do, midnight, and you're good neighbors for a year, you can go back to the city and request an approval for 1 a.m. on Fridays and Saturdays. So we didn't do that a year later.
Yeah,
We didn't
yeah,
do that
you're-
2 years
you're
later. We
doing it
did that.
now.
Well, we did that 6 months ago. And we were told we just needed to call the sheriff's department, call the sheriff's department. Sheriff's department said, you guys are not the problem. You guys are great. 1 a.m., all the documents are in.
And we're sorting it out right now.
Well, from what we know, it's approved.
Okay, from what I know, it's, seeing here, not quite yet.
Okay.
Yes, that's to, let's see
correct?
here. You're correct. The use permit is what allows the hours to extend, not solely the sheriff's department. So we need the sheriff's department's concurrence with it to bring it forward to planning commission in order to solidify it through the use permit to allow those hours.
So now the sheriff's department, though, have they, so we can do this now if we want.
The sheriff's department
Sheriff
has,
provided that.
they have no concerns with the proposed hours
They had
of
no
operation.
comments. They were okay with it.
Oh, okay, that was the question. Thank you. That was a little bit funny, but still, yeah, honestly, this is open and shut to me. I think you bet on good people. I would make a motion to approve this as per staff recommendation.
Second?
Can I just make a comment?
Oh, yeah, please.
Sorry, I know
We
you
can have discussion
and-
before vote.
Okay.
We could have a,
So if this was coming to us anew, and they hadn't had, I think I wrote down the year that they, 1982, that they had the 6 a.m. Permit for serving alcohol, I personally would think that that's too early, and I'm not anti-alcohol at all, but because this has been in existence since 1982, and they have shown that they are good neighbors, I'm okay with it for this particular purpose.
thank you.
under
Yeah,
these
that's,
circumstances.
we can make case-by-case allocations here. I think there was a steakhouse we did over in Cardiff Restaurant Row, and they argued that against 8 o'clock, they wanted earlier because they were going to have dawn champagne breakfasts, and it was like, yep, people will drink early in the morning, but at expensive places, usually they're not like drinking out of a paper bag.
Real quick, for staff, so on page 13 again, so they've asked to go to 1 o'clock on Friday and Saturday, correct?
Yes.
All right, but looking at page 13, there are many restaurants or many establishments. I see Home 1969 can go to 1:30. I see Daily Double Saloon going to 2 a.m., right? And then Shelter can go on Saturday to 2 a.m., is that
Right.
right? So they're asking for something less than what others already have?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so we have a motion and a second. Just to be clear, the motion I made was incorporated the staff recommendation, which is to eliminate the decision to, or actually to, how am I saying this? We're formalizing the usage of the outdoor alcohol dining as per the City Council 2022-28. So we've got, all right.
Also, the memorandum.
We've got a motion and a second, and
Looks,
did I miss something?
there was just the memorandum
Oh, yes.
acknowledgement for that.
Oh, thank you very much. And also, this motion should include the memorandum that was received earlier this afternoon. And everyone is okay with that?
Was just the rendering, and then there was the two sentences.
Yeah, it had to do with that, because they had hand-drawn an awning over the new space.
Right,
But
okay.
there is no awning over the new space.
Right, okay, thank you.
Looks like the motion passes unanimously. And thank you very much. I'm going to call this 8B closed, and I'm going to propose we take a short break before we move into our final item. Thank you, everyone. We'll come back in, I don't know, 10 minutes? 10? Oh, all right. We're actually being planning commissioners finally. It's like, we're doing stuff. We're a little let's get back. Thank you, everyone. We are starting up with case number 8C. This is a policy number, doesn't even have a name, 6248-2023. This is a public hearing to consider a recommendation to City Council to adopt the vehicle miles traveled guidelines as required. Evan Jedniak will present this in a moment. Do we have any disclosures before I jump in? No, I didn't expect any. Evan, let's have a presentation on this, please.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Planning Commission. Evan Jednak, Senior Mobility Planner, here tonight to present the SB 743 Vehicle Miles Traveled, or VMT, Analysis Guidelines. We also have Patty Anders, Planning Manager, Katie Cole with Fair and Piers, the Project Consultant, and Abe Bandigan, City Traffic Engineer. So before I get into the presentation, we wanted to show the Commission this 2-minute VMT 101 video that was made by our project consultant, Fair and Piers, for the general public. They have a couple of these up on YouTube. This is the most introductory one, simple explanation of the concept of VMTs that we thought would be beneficial to start with.
What is VMT? VMT, or Vehicle Miles Traveled, refers to the distance that a car travels regardless of how many passengers are in the car. So this car, traveling 1 mile, would generate 1 VMT, and 4 vehicles, traveling 10 miles, would generate 40 VMT. To understand how much VMT a person generates on a typical weekday, it's useful to map their travel throughout the day. In this example, Jess starts the day at home, drives to the coffee shop 2 miles away, and then heads to work, which is 10 miles from the coffee shop. After a day at the office, Jess returns home 11 miles away. Later, Jess heads out and drives 1 mile to the gas station to fill up, before driving another 3 miles to the grocery store, and then makes the 2-mile trip back home. By adding together the miles driven, it is shown that Jess has generated 29 VMT for the entire day. This VMT can be further categorized into the individual trip purposes that motivated each leg of the trip. VMT can be organized into 3 typical trip purposes: home to work, or HW, home to other, or HO, and other to other, or OO. This organization is helpful in understanding that trips to and from work tend to generate the most VMT because people are willing to drive longer distances as the benefit of the trip increases. Do you have other questions about VMT?
So we'll start with some background here. VMT guidelines are required to comply with revised CEQA legislation, specifically SB 743 that was passed in 2013. Previously, CEQA review of a project's transportation impact was based on level of service, or LOS, which measures traffic congestion and vehicle delay. Per the revised CEQA legislation, starting in 2020, LOS shall no longer be used as a measure to determine the transportation impacts of a project. Instead, CEQA guidelines state that VMT is the most appropriate measure of transportation impacts. Now, it's important to note that VMT only replaces LOS for CEQA purposes. LOS is still a component of the city's general plan and will continue to be analyzed for general plan consistency. New guidelines and thresholds related to LOS are currently being developed as part of the mobility element update and will be presented at a later date. VMT guidelines establish thresholds for CEQA transportation impacts, identifies VMT analysis methodologies, and identifies potential mitigation strategies. Screening procedures allow the city to quickly determine whether projects can be presumed to have a less than significant VMT impact, meaning they do not need to conduct a full VMT analysis. The California Office of Planning and Research, or OPR, suggests certain projects can be presumed to have a less than significant transportation impact, shown here. If one of these screening criteria is met, then the project can be presumed to have a less than significant VMT impact without further analysis. So the first is the small project daily vehicle trip screening. Per OPR, this includes projects that generate less than 110 average daily trips, or ADT. It also includes projects located within a half-mile radius of an existing major transit stop, which in our case is only the Encinitas Coaster Rail Station. Projects in a VMT efficient area, which is any area within the city with an average VMT below the significance thresholds, which will be discussed in later slides. Locally serving retail projects that are less than 50,000 square feet. Locally serving public facilities, which would include public schools, libraries, government offices, or public parks. And redevelopment projects when the proposed total VMT is less than the existing total VMT. So for projects that meet one of these criteria, the applicant would just need to provide a technical memorandum of the screening process. So on the previous slide, I discussed the small project screening threshold of 110 ADT. So this table shown here is from SANDAG, and it provides trip generation rates by land use. There's a whole document. The portion shown here is for residential uses only. As it can be seen, a single-family detached residential project typical to Encinitas generates 10 ADT per dwelling unit. So the 110 ADT small project screening threshold would mean an 11-unit single-family detached subdivision requires a full VMT analysis unless they meet one of the other screening criteria. So as can be seen here, the rate decreases for multifamily housing like condominiums or apartments. To give some context, shown here are examples of what other cities in the region use for their small project screening threshold. As can be seen, Carlsbad, San Marcos, most other cities in the region use 110 ADT, which is what OPR guidelines suggest and what we are proposing for Encinitas. It can also be seen that some other cities in the region use a much higher threshold, including Santee, Oceanside, San Diego, Chula Vista, and Escondido. So projects that do not meet a screening criteria must provide an evaluation of the VMT produced by the project. This evaluation must analyze whether the project has a significant environmental impact based on the significance thresholds shown here, described by land use types. If greater than the existing citywide VMT average, a residential project is considered to have a significant impact. Using the latest SANDAG model, the citywide average threshold would be 22.1 VMT per capita. Employment projects, this includes all employment types, office, commercial, hotel, industrial, etc. So this, if greater than the existing regional average, an employment project is considered to have a significant impact. Using the latest SANDAG model, this threshold is 18.9 VMT per employee. For regional retail, recreation, or public facilities, if a project results in a net increase in total regional VMT, it is considered to have a significant impact. For mixed use, each project component is evaluated per the appropriate metric based on the land use type. So I'll touch on mitigation measures in a later slide, but if a project has a significant VMT impact that cannot be mitigated to a less than significant level, an environmental impact report is required under CEQA. So to determine the VMT per capita or VMT per employee for development projects, applicants must identify the location of the project on SANDAG's VMT maps. The project's VMT is the same as a VMT of the census tract or traffic analysis zone, known as TAZ, in which the project is located. Applicants can use either census tract or TAZ in their analysis, although there is incomplete data for some TAZs, in which case census tracts must be used. The SANDAG model and maps will be updated over time, therefore the significance threshold numbers will change over time. So shown here is a screenshot of the current SANDAG VMT map showing VMT per capita for residential VMT at the census tract level, with the city boundary as well as other city boundaries outlined in red. It can be seen that tracts in the northern part of the city are below the 22.1 threshold, while tracts in the southern and eastern portion of the city are above this threshold. So this means the areas north of the green line shown in this slide are VMT efficient areas and would therefore be screened out. Areas south and east of this green line are not in VMT efficient areas. So these are areas where, for example, again, an 11-unit subdivision or more would require an EIR if it cannot be mitigated to below the significance threshold. Here's a flow chart from the guidelines that helps navigate applicants through the process. So the first step here is to check if the project meets one of the screening criteria discussed earlier, and which are shown again on the top right. So projects that are screened out can provide a technical memo of how it meets the screening criteria, and that concludes the process. Projects that are not screened out must move down to the next tier shown here, which is to identify the total project VMT using the Sandag maps. If the project VMT is below the significance thresholds, which again is 22.1 for residential and 18.9 for employment, then a finding of less than significant impact can be made and the process concludes. If the project is above these thresholds, then a finding of significant impact must be made. For those projects with a significant VMT impact, mitigation measures can be identified to attempt to mitigate the impact to a level below the significance threshold. As mentioned earlier, if a significant impact cannot be mitigated to less than a significant level, an EIR is required. So to mitigate VMT impacts, the applicant must reduce project VMT, which can be done by either reducing the number of car trips generated by the project or by reducing the distance that people drive. So there are two strategies to achieve this. First is to modify the project's built environment characteristics to reduce VMT generated by the project. This could be done by decreasing residential units or increasing commercial or retail space. Second would be to implement transit demand management or TDM measures to reduce the VMT generated by the project. TDM measures are strategies that reduce single occupant car trips or reduce travel distances. The guidelines include links to resources for TDM measures, such as the CAPCOA GHG mitigation measures report. Some example of TDM measures from this report include employer van pools, telecommuting, or transit pass programs. So since the staff report was published, staff has identified a couple minor revisions that we recommend be incorporated into the guidelines. The first is on page 7 under the VMT analysis procedures heading, second paragraph, second sentence. This revision is to make it clear that city approval is required to use another tool other than Sandag's tool. The other revisions occur on pages 10 and 11, where the Sandag Mobility Management Guidebook VMT Reduction Calculator tool is referenced. Staff became aware through our project consultant that this guidebook is now outdated, so we are removing all references to this. This concludes staff's presentation. Staff is recommending for the Planning Commission to adopt the resolution recommending City Council approval of the VMT guidelines with the staff revisions just touched on tonight. And we are here for questions.
Thank you, Evan. I've got questions. Anyone else? Bob, why don't you want me to start? Okay. I am concerned with the VMT efficient areas. I'm looking at the map, probably it's on the one on page 4. And let's just pick an area right in the middle. That's a good one right there, 19.98, right in the middle, just north of the green line. So if I were to build, say I want to build a 100-unit housing development there, I would look at this, and this is, I'm comparing this to, we just had this discussion 2 weeks ago. I would say, well, it's a 19.98, so we're under it, so I'm good to go. There's no checks or balances. I mean, I'm not really comparing. It feels like I'm going to be comparing the 19.98 to 19.98, or in this case, I think 22.1. Anything less than 22.1, and by my understanding, that's it. We're done. There's no oversight. We don't. They could be building 10 units. They could be building 1,000 units. I'm looking for a metric. I'm just perhaps try and explain this to me, because I am totally not seeing how this is at all a useful tool for me as a planning commissioner.
Yeah, to answer your question, if it's in the VMT efficient area, it would not have to comply with the VMT analysis per CEQA. As we mentioned earlier, LOS will still continue to be used as a general plan consistency metric. So they would still have to prepare an LOS analysis, if it meets those thresholds which are in development.
Yeah, I understood that part. Let me ask a further question. Now, we've chosen to pick the 22.1 VMT per capita, which is, I guess, average for Encinitas.
Yeah, correct.
Why are we not, 22.1 is already severely impacted. The countywide average is severely impacted. Why aren't we comparing it to 16 point, whatever it is down there, and in which case, literally there are no VMT efficient zones in Encinitas. Everything is over, by my reading. And I'd love to hear someone try and disabuse me of this notion.
Commissioner Doyle, we're going to ask Katie Cole of Fear and Peers, who's the author and resident expert, I want to say, in VMT, to give more of a context and background of the numbers and the context of the numbers.
Sure, yeah, thank you, Patty. My name is Katie Cole, I'm with Fair and Peers, and I'm just gonna explain to you about this metric and what the VMT analysis is attempting to accomplish and what the state is requiring you to do for CEQA impact analysis. So what you're looking at today is simply a way of looking at how to disclose a VMT impact under the transportation section for CEQA. And the state says that now the most appropriate way of looking at this is VMT. And there are different ways that we can analyze VMT. The metric for a residential project that is suggested is VMT per person. And the way that you establish your threshold is looking at VMT per person now, and for CEQA, you want new growth to perform better than today to not have a VMT impact. And so that's what this information is showing you. So the citywide average VMT per person, so each of you who live in the city of Encinitas on average travel 22.1 miles per day. And what this threshold is setting is that for new people, new residents of the city of Encinitas, they need to travel less than 22.1 VMT per day to have a less than significant impact for CEQA according to the state. I should also mention that VMT is used in calculations for other areas of CEQA. So for example, GHG analysis. There's a whole separate section in an EIR, in a CEQA analysis that addresses GHG, and that has its own separate significance criteria. So what we are looking at today is just purely looking at the transportation impact for CEQA specifically. And so your citywide average is 22.1. Other cities have different averages. The regions, if you include the whole region, including the county and all of the incorporated cities, the regional average VMT per person is 18.9. So you can see there are different ways of looking at it. The way that we are recommending in your guidelines is consistent with the metric that the state suggests to use.
Our position here, usually it's like, I'll have a large housing project move in. Let's take a hypothetical. I have a 1,000-unit apartment building structure going to move into this zone that's listed at 19.98. We're going to look at this and say, well, we're going to assume that every single one of those people is going to have 19.98, and that will be the average. So, because we looked at these numbers, somewhat dated. The last project I had to look at 2016 numbers. Whether there's one of them or 1,000 or 10,000, it doesn't matter. And that's not useful to me as a planning commissioner, because my job is not to approve or disapprove projects, but is to plan for the future. And if I don't have a metric that tells me whether or not this large project is going to have an impact, well, I have to look at this and say, well, it's in that area, so it has no impact. And I mean, that's absurd on the face of it.
Yeah, and so I can explain a little bit why the state has suggested using VMT per person instead of just aggregate VMT for residential projects. So I think what you're observing is that whenever you add new residents, you add total VMT. We all drive, and so we create new VMT, and so as we're adding new housing stock, we're adding VMT, and that is true. And so what the state recognizes is the need to add housing, but they But what they are recommending is that we do it at a rate that the new residents that we have moving into our new housing is producing less VMT than our existing resident on a per person basis. And that's why the state has suggested using, this is called an efficiency metric as opposed to an aggregate VMT metric. And so as a decision maker, you're looking at this and saying, is this project in a good location? Because if we moved it further out, it would generate more VMT. If you were to take your same 100-unit apartment complex and put it in a location that is further away from services and jobs, that's a disbenefit, right? That is an environmental impact. Those people who are new residents don't have access at the same distance as somebody who is in this particular census tract. And VMT is largely predictable by location. It's what we have access to. It's really a measure of access. It's how close are we to our jobs? How close are we to the grocery store, to our kids' recreation, to our kids' schools? And so the purpose of this map that you're seeing that Sandag produced is really trying to explain to all of us where the kind of ideal locations for development to happen are, because they are naturally just going to have less VMT than putting that same type of project in a further out, more suburban or more rural context. It is really difficult to reduce our VMT. Think about your own daily lives, right? And if you had to identify your kind of typical travel throughout the day and pick one of the places that you normally go to either not make that trip or to do it in a different way, maybe by biking and walking, it's really difficult to do that because we all are needing to have convenience, we're needing to access our jobs, we're needing to get our kids to school. And so reducing VMT just on the face of it is really hard. So the best thing you can do is put it in a place that already has a lower VMT per person. Put the new development in a place. And so that's what the purpose of this map, this efficiency map that you're seeing, is showing you that. It's showing you that those places that are in the dark blue, they're going to just naturally, if you were to build something new there, those residents are going to have access to the same types of jobs and services that those existing residents have. And so putting a new project in the dark blue area is not as ideal as putting it in the lighter blue area, just kind of at a baseline level.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's usually not a decision for us to make. The housing developments, for instance, are happening where they're going to happen. So my concern has always been, there will be increased demand for services and infrastructure, and how do I mitigate for this? And this metric, unfortunately, doesn't help me there. I mean, the efficiency, I understand the efficiency concept, that if it is efficient, it'll only get efficient when it turns into a city, that little block. And now there's stores and everything right there. And of course, people won't drive because they don't need to. But, that's like, 50, 100 years in the future, when we turn into this big megapolis. It's, I don't know. Now, the further question, the 22.1, the citywide average, are we obligated to pick that number, or was that?
You are not. The city has discretion to set your impact criteria based on your community values. The state provided a resource. The Office of Planning and Research provided a technical advisory that provides some guidance for what metrics to use, what thresholds to use. The technical advisory that was produced by the state suggests that you use 15% below your citywide average or regional average. And so that's an option. There are other options. Some agencies are using the build out of their general plan and looking at VMT per capita at the build out of their general plan and setting their threshold consistent with that. So there are different ways to set your threshold, provided that you have evidence, substantial evidence, that's the CEQA lingo for it,
Yeah, I know it.
to set it in the way that you've set it.
Okay, well, great, thank you. We're still in the question area. I think, Susan, you're prepared, right?
Yes, so since the Office of Planning and Research suggests 15% below the regional VMT average may be presumed to be less significant. Why did you not elect that option?
Again, this was debated amongst city staff and looking at the context of the city and the values in the general plan so that you can actually accomplish the land use goals and the policies that you have in your general plan. Setting the threshold at or below average kind of meets the intent of the general plan. There are other methods within the city that are used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, such as your climate action plan. You also have planning documents that help establish alternative modes of transportation. So for example, your active transportation plan. And so just for kind of weighing the different options for a threshold, this was the threshold that staff kind of aligned with the goals within the general plan. So that's why. And also to be clear, the technical advisory is only that. It's a technical advisory. If you look at, if you want to get really into the weeds and look at the language in the technical advisory, the very first paragraph talks about city discretion. The purpose of the technical advisory is to provide advice and recommendations which agencies and other entities may use at their discretion. It does not alter the lead agency's discretion in preparing environmental documents, and it is not constructed as legal advice. The technical advisory was really using information that is statewide, so there are a series of assembly bills and Senate bills that establish statewide goals around GHG emissions. And the technical advisory relied on that information to set the 15%. 15% was also set as a somewhat of an arbitrary number. There are many different studies and policies that the state has around GHG, and there's a variety of reduction targets that are set within all of these different assembly bills. 15% was a convenient round number that they picked for the technical advisory.
Do we have any more questions for staff before we go to public comment?
Is it true that all our R30 sites are categorically exempt from CEQA?
I need my glasses. The R30 sites, if they do not have a subdivision and provide 20% affordable, they are exempt from CEQA, correct?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, 20% affordable? There was a, Piraeus was 15%.
Piraeus, though, had to do the whole EIR.
They did one, that's right.
And Bob, pull your mic closer
Sorry,
to your face.
I had turned it off. Evan, can you go back to your presentation for a second? Keep going. Where you reference ADTs. So I'm a little confused. You can help me out why we've gone from VMTs and now we're incorporating average daily trips as part of this calculation. Where in the plan are we switching from VMTs to ADTs?
So OPR, as part of their technical advisory, suggested several screening criteria that are characteristics of a project where you would presume that a project is less than significant. One of those screening criteria is small projects. And OPR has defined a small project using ADT because it's convenient, and we, as traffic engineers, have lots of data around this. And so their definition of small project is 110 ADT. What that comes from is in CEQA, you can have a categorical exemption for a expansion of 10,000 square feet or less. So the way that OPR calculated 110 is they said, okay, if I can be categorically exempt at 10,000 square feet, if I assume that that 10,000 square feet is an office, how much trips does a 10,000 square foot office generate? And it's 110 ADT. And so that's where the 110 ADT stemmed from the state's technical advisory.
Thank you. Could you go to the next slide? I think you talk about Santee and all the other cities. One more.
This one here?
There. The one that says Santee, Escondido, that one. All right, other smalls. Okay, so what is our current small project as comparison? Where are we on this? Where's Encinitas?
We are proposing the 110 ADT.
The lowest.
Yeah, correct.
Whereas other cities are 3 times that, like City of San Diego or Oceanside's 5 times that. Why are we choosing the lowest threshold?
So I can address this. So all agencies have discretion when they're setting their thresholds and their screening criteria. So different agencies had different reasons for setting things the way they set them, but I can talk about each of these. I was involved in most of them.
Well, my question is why
did
do you recommend that we do
110
when Santee did 500?
Yeah. So this is so in your guidelines, we have, as you have noted, your threshold for the impact was set at or below average. And so we wanted to strike a balance with the screening criteria where we weren't setting the screening criteria for a small project so large that you would screen out a lot of those projects before getting to the VMT analysis portion. But then on the VMT analysis portion, once you get to that stage, the at or below average threshold helps kind of incentivize putting the development in the best location from a VMT perspective. So you can kind of see the trade-off. If we were to set the ADT as a really high number, you could get development all throughout the city.
Understood. It was inversely proportional. Thank you. I missed that. Thank you. What is a transportation analysis zone?
It's just a geographic unit that Sandag uses to analyze traffic in their Sandag and their regional travel demand model. So it's a kind of a geographic unit that fits within census tracts, and I think Evan is going to kind of bring up for Encinitas, what it looks like. But it's just a convenient way that Sandag sorts land use and roadway network to analyze traffic in their travel demand model.
And the numbers we're seeing are VMT numbers?
You're seeing VMT per capita, VMT per resident.
Okay, so how are these numbers different than using the census tracts? Are they higher or lower? And and which criteria did you choose and why?
So the census tracts are, in general, the census tracts include about 5 TAZs. So it's an aggregation. The census tract is giving you the average or the aggregation of about 5 census tracts or 5 TAZs. And the reason that we chose census tracts is that, as you can see on this map, there are several locations within Encinitas that anything you see that's in gray, there's not enough information available in those TAZs, which means that there's not very much land use in the TAZs. Sandag will only publish the number for a TAZ if there's more than 300 residents or 500 employees in an individual TAZ. And so because of the lack of data in the TAZs, and because Sandag recommends using census tracts to display their data, we have recommended census tracts. But the data at the TAZ level is available for some locations.
Which one is more restrictive?
It's going to depend on the location,
Okay,
honestly.
so exactly that. So as a planning commission, using a more exact smaller location versus a blended bigger location gives us more insight into the impact of a project in a specific smaller location rather than blending it across 10 square miles. We can look at the impact around 5 square miles based on a TAZ. So if we wanted to be more specific, my understanding, if we wanted to be more specific on the impact of a project, we would not use the census data track, we would use a TAZ.
And the guidelines are set up to do that currently. So it essentially says, look at the TAZ. If there's not enough data in that TAZ to make a determination for that small geography, then you would go to census tract.
And that's in the current plan that's proposed in front of us tonight?
Yes.
The TAZ first, census tract
Correct.
second.
Yeah.
But you presented on census tracts.
So I think Evan kind of talked through both. He showed the map at the census tract level because all of the data was there for you to see.
Okay.
Here's switching back now to census tract.
But what you're proposing is we use TAZs as a first check. And if we don't
Right.
have complete data in one of those gray areas, we would then use a broader
Right.
proposal for a
Correct.
census tract. Okay. And then, as the OPR has suggested, the guidelines, and as per some of the correspondence from both the Sierra Club and the Coastal Law Group, have suggested 15% at a minimum. Is it my understanding that in the memorandum, you've suggested 0 reduction?
We suggested at or below average, so yeah, 0% below average. So if you are 1% below average, you would not have an impact.
My understanding, City of San Diego, County of San Diego, Oceanside, Carlsbad, Escondido are all using the OPR.
They're all using 15%.
15%.
Yeah. So in this region, in the San Diego County region, all of the agencies that have adopted guidelines are using 15% below average. Around the state, there are several examples of agencies that are using different numbers. Some are using 15%, some are using 16.4, many are using at or below average. There's a wide variety.
So why recommend, so if the ultimate goal here is if we just say we'll take the one in the middle, 20, the census tract number, the impact of the VMT would be to target 15, if a development is coming in, we would want to target 15% below the 20, correct?
You would want to target 15% below your citywide average, which is 20. So your citywide average is 22.1. 15% below that is 18.8.
And if the applicant does not achieve that, what are the mitigation responsibilities per the suggestion today?
They would need to do travel demand management measures to either reduce the number of trips that they create or reduce the distance of the trips that they travel.
Have any other cities had specific requirements of someone who does not meet the 15% target reduction? In other words, rather than I'll give you a map to the bus station, or I'll give you a map to the rail station so you can catch the train, what has cities like, say, Escondido done?
So Escondido created so their guidelines are that a project would need to mitigate their impact. They can do TDM measures, they can do, really it's TDM measures. The city of Escondido did take a phase two, they kind of went a second step further than just adopting their guidelines. They created a VMT exchange program. And so what that includes is a list of bicycle and pedestrian related infrastructure projects that assign a certain amount of VMT to each of those projects. So if a project comes forward and has a VMT impact, they can use this exchange program and pick a project off of the list to help mitigate their project impact.
And fund that, correct?
And fund it. So the way that their program works is that the applicant would be responsible for picking the project through consultation with city staff, but also carrying the project forward under construction. So the city, the way that their program is written, the city is not responsible for designing and building the project, the applicant is. This was adopted in December of last year, and a couple of projects have used the program. There have been no projects yet constructed using this exchange program. Escondido is also the only one in the state that has set up a program like this. It's kind of a new program. They are on the cutting edge of it. There are a lot of different agencies around the state looking at various ways to mitigate VMT because it is so challenging. So exchanges, there's agencies that are looking at doing VMT banks where it's almost like cap and trade, where they're looking at ways to kind of bank saved VMT and then sell it to applicants. And so there are many agencies that have gone through a process of adopting guidelines first, that's step one, and then coming back with various ways, creative ways of trying to mitigate VMT impacts. The result, though, even in Escondido's case, is that a project, a smallish project, could be a 20-unit project, they still if they have a significant impact, they would pick something off of the exchange list, they may still have a significant impact. And so they still would be needing to move forward with an EIR and a statement of overriding considerations and resulting in a significant and and unavoidable
But what
VMT impact.
Thank you. It's an excellent explanation, and it's nice to see people like Escondido or cities like Escondido trying to be on the cutting edge. I would hope that we would try to be on the cutting edge also. What it also does is it gives a applicant the ability to quantify upfront in the pro forma some of the obligations it might have. This is being suggested later on in a development process where this gets put on them. They could price it in up front, and it could be part of their pro forma, knowing if they can't meet the 15%, if that's what we decide on doing, or 10% or 1% or whatever that number is. It gives the applicant clarity without having so much subjectiveness involved. So I like the idea of having something in the resolutions or in our plan, and maybe it's not tonight, of course it's not tonight, but in the future, so that an applicant can understand what it's going to have to do to build a project that doesn't meet our VMT ordinance. So I got a couple more, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, let's, we're still in question and answer mode here. Do we have any public speakers this evening?
We do. We have 2 speakers.
All right, and we have 2 people in the audience. What a coincidence.
First up is Harold Standerfer.
Let's open up public comment.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this issue, as we're getting pretty far into the weeds here after 9 o'clock at night. My name is Harold Standerfer. I'm a resident of Olivenhain, and I'm here tonight actually speaking on behalf of the Sierra Club. You should have a letter that was sent to you from Sierra Club sort of outlining some of our concerns regarding the proposed guidelines to implement SB 743. Most of them have already been mentioned by various commissioners this evening, so I won't go through that list that I have made, but I wanted to make 3 points and then make a plea. We would support using the regional average as opposed to the city average. For obvious reasons, it's lower. We support using the 15% threshold that's suggested in the guidelines. And wanted to point out, thirdly, that as currently constituted, and I think one of the commissioners pointed out, essentially everything would be screened out under the current criteria or the suggested criteria, and we wouldn't end up with any mitigation for any of the projects that come before you. So we would like to bear that in mind. My plea is that when we're considering projects and developments, things that come before you, we always should be considering climate change and the impact of greenhouse gas emissions and we should do anything we can do to limit greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation is the #1 source of greenhouse emissions here in the city of Encinitas. And we owe it to ourselves and our children, our grandchildren in the future, if we're to have one, to do everything in our power to mitigate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next is Dolores Welty.
Dolores Welty.
We kept you sitting so long. We're sorry.
Beg pardon?
I said, I'm sorry, we kept you waiting so long.
Yeah, I almost got glued to that chair. Anyway, Dolores Welty from Leucadia, Encinitas, off La Costa. And I have a lot to say, but I'm not going to say it. I'm going to give you a Roman quote, first of all, from back in the old days, and probably Seneca, or no, Cicero, which is, they became so adept at the law that they made stealing from the poor appear justified. And I've always liked that because it reminds you that you can get lost in the details and forget what you're doing. And then you become very adept at using the shoulds and shalls and all that. So I'm going to say about parking, I don't approve of the state moving in and taking over our land use and telling us what to do. And the parking, San Francisco has always cut back on their parking because they have wonderful public transportation. And we don't. So that's an emphasis we really need to look at. I mean, very strongly, if we're going to cut back on cars and on parking and try to make everybody ride a bike, you can imagine I'm not going to. But our population is getting older. Anyway, don't skip the public transportation. That's a planning issue for y'all. And finally, ADTs, LOS, and VMTs on La Costa's have failed. LOS. And when the new development right next to the hotel was approved, they couldn't meet their VMTs. But they would have been able to meet their VMTs if you'd have just canceled those last 4 buildings, which will remove Roberto's and that little mall there. So I don't think you're very serious about doing anything about LOS and VMTs and ADTs. And how many ADTs do you think, Maria, that hotel requires? How many average daily trips from their people who work there? Did you count that? When you're counting, when the state is, or anybody is counting up ADTs, how do you know where these people come from and where they go? I hardly drive at all anymore. But when I did, good God, I had a 2-hour commute. More than an hour up and more than an hour back. And good grief. Anyway, good luck. I think you're doing a good job, but I think the focus needs to be somewhere else. Public transportation, for one. Environment, for another. Thanks.
Thank you, Dolores. I'm going to, there's no one else in the audience, I'm going to close public comment, and we can move on to our commission deliberation. I think for me, this is a pretty well thought out piece, although I really don't like comparing our numbers to our numbers. I feel we need a metric. I need something to compare one thing to another. I think 15% below would be reasonable, and maybe we can get down to smaller areas than the census tracts and find areas that truly are VMT efficient, but honestly, I don't think we have any. And I think if that's what the numbers show, then that's the situation. You know, I don't want to fudge the numbers higher in order to, take a couple of areas and say, well, in these areas, you don't need to do CEQA. So I think, I would have liked to see it super low, but regional, if I even go 15% below the citywide average would bring it down to what, 18.8. At this point, I don't think anything here meets that. Theoretically, in a future SANDAG release, some of them could, in which case they would be considered VMT efficient in my eyes. Or perhaps I have to admit I didn't quite understand all the details. I think we can get down to smaller areas and look at their precise VMT, but I would accept this, but it needs to be compared to something realistic, not our citywide average. Minus 15%, that's about anything higher than that, and I'll rebel. I will definitely not support this recommendation.
I would like to say that the 15% below the regional, not city, VMT is what my target would be to support this. I will not support anything higher.
What is the regional average compared to your 22.1 city average?
Yeah, the regional average can actually be seen on the very right side of the screen. It might be hard to see. It's 18.9 for both VMT per resident and VMT per employee. 18.9.
All right, so
15% below that.
So 15% below that is 16.1. And so just for clarity, to show you the map, so if you set your number at 16.1, you would have certainly no areas that come close to that, and your mitigation measures for what the research has shown is that in a city with the context of Encinitas, so primarily suburban in context, the most reduction that you can get through TDM measures is about 5%. So even with applying mitigation measures to projects that go through an EIR process, you will likely still end up with the majority, if not all of your projects having a significant and unavoidable impact.
Well, almost all of our projects don't go through CEQA anyway.
But isn't our goal to able to capture those projects that would have a significant impact and try to mitigate those, whether it's with to the climate action plan or greenhouse gases, which is in other places. That's the objective, is we're trying to reduce our impact. So lowering the number and using the regional number at 0.7, I missed that.
18.9.
18.9, the threshold would be 16.1.
Then we're going to be able to impact, or the developer would have to contribute in some way to mitigate the impacts that he's having. The higher the number, the more projects will skate through and not have impacts. I like the idea that Escondido did in terms of being able to quantify rather than just handing out a bus pass, which is what, when I was on the Mobility Commission, the TDM was basically, this is the route to get to the train station. I don't have to do anything else. So I like the idea, the best practices I like the idea of the lower number to capture more projects and have those, because those projects will have an impact on us, whether it's 18.9 or 22.1. I'm not sure how the city's 22.1, to your point, was established. But we know what the regional SANDAG numbers are.
That's a SANDAG number for our area, but I think, subtracting 15% brings it back to the regional average, approximately 18.8, 18.9.
Just think that we can try harder and do better than the regional average.
Right now, the temptation, I see it, is to kind of split it in the difference, so half our zones are VMT efficient and half aren't. And, that's short-sighted, because this is a moving target we've got here in front of us. Right now, realistically, none of these areas are VMT efficient. I mean, they could be if we approve this and council backed it, but the fact is they're not really. They could be, and they perhaps will be in the future, and that's why I think we should be picking a number that's either below our citywide average or at the county average, or actually I wouldn't go below that. I mean, we're always going to be dense. I just want it to be somewhat lower than 22.1. I think that's unreasonable. Steve, you want to take it away?
I agree with Bob. I think where your points are, and yours as well, Kevin. I think we should be aspirational, but I think we need to be realistic. We can't be putting in barriers to new housing under the kind of the guise that we're being environmentally friendly or being super aggressive. So I like the model of the VMT exchange that Escondido started, and I think it's outlined in the one of these letters, correspondence that we received. And I think of being aspirational by being 15% below. I think being below the regional average is too aggressive. I think it would be, in my mind, acceptable to say if our city has a certain average, the 22 point whatever one, we should do better than that. But we got to be realistic that we are in Encinitas and we're not in downtown San Diego or other areas that can get lower numbers because of their other amenities. So I don't support going as low as, lower than the regional average by 15%, but I would support being lower than the city's average by some number.
It appears that it was arbitrary to pick the city versus the regional. Is that correct?
So the OPR Technical Advisory for Residential provides an option. They recommend either using your citywide average or the regional average.
So the recommendation from staff is optional. Staff recommended the 22.1. And was that from you? Was that from Larry's? Is that from your firm or was that from staff?
We provided several options and talked through the kind of the general plan, what the growth plans were for the city, what the current VMT per capita was from the city, and collectively came up with a recommendation of 22.1. It wasn't directed by Fair and Peers, or it was looking at kind of holistically the context of the city and kind of meeting the city's general plan goals.
But everything depends on what's coming. When things are developed, then the VMT number could actually increase. The regional or city VMT numbers can go up.
Your
and are
aggregate
likely to go up
VMT, yeah, your aggregate
because we're
VMT
having
will
more
go up.
development. As that number goes up, whatever policy we put into place today reacts to that new number.
So just to kind of get a feel, so just looking at the numbers, the Encinitas 22.1, if we went 15% below that, it's 18.8, and the regional average is 18.9. So those numbers are really close. So I'm kind of just wondering what people are thinking. I think that it seems like there's a consensus maybe to not go 15% below regional average, as Susan proposes, but just trying to get an idea of what everyone else is thinking.
I'm targeting 15% below citywide average. It'll be a moving number. As Sandag comes up with this, it'll put things at 18.8, 18.9 currently. Most of the big projects we're seeing will get snagged by this, and they will force to go through extra hoops, and we will have an opportunity to put mitigation measures in place. If we set the number too high, then we miss the opportunity to do mitigation.
If I can get a clarification from staff on this, so if it gets lowered, then even kind of a small project would then be required to do a full EIR because of solely this significant impact, correct?
That is correct. And one other point of clarification is that and Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of assessing the 22.1 versus the regional, the region incorporates all areas of the county, rural, suburban, urban, whereas the 22.1 was in the context of the suburban area of Encinitas. And we're looking at our land uses, our VMT. So it kind of gives us more control over what we set our guidelines for, because the SB 743 requires that the city establish their own guidelines to implement to be in compliance with the law. So we just need to be mindful that the lower the number means even small projects will be doing a full-blown EIR, and even with that EIR, it likely will not be able to mitigate the impacts to a level of less than significance. So we'll be doing an EIR for the sake of doing an EIR, but the mitigation measures will not change.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, well, most of us are in agreement that the citywide numbers should be the basis for this. I mean, my concern is not small projects. I don't want to snag people in, huge processes, but my concern is large projects that will have a huge impact on our city, and if they happen to land in one of these magic zones that's slightly below 22.1, then they can do whatever the hell they please, and that's not proper.
Well, my understanding is those small projects would be exempt from CEQA to begin with. Are they not exempt? And the VMT only applies to projects that are subject to CEQA that do the EIRs.
Yeah, perhaps this could be where we have a higher ADT. So we have this small project list you showed us where we came in at 110, and Chula Vista was at 500. I don't remember all the rest. Maybe you could pull that back up on screen, Evan. Now, if those small projects are listed that way, are they, let's say you're below 110 ADT, you're exempt from these CEQA requirements. Is that the way this is written?
Yeah, you're presumed to have a less than significant impact if you have less than 110 ADT, which I think what, kind of just as a reminder, that equates to about 11 single-family homes.
Yep, I know, 10 per. So if we wanted to lower the threshold of significance, 15% below our citywide average, but we didn't want to snag small projects, then we would raise that number. Let's say, picture how many units. If it's a 20-unit apartment, then it would be 200, or a 20 dwelling units. You know, so we have two numbers we could play with. We should be lowering, I believe, the threshold of significance, and then if we don't want to, we're concerned about snagging small projects that shouldn't have to go through a CEQA, well, let's raise this number. We actually have already a lever here. Small project screening thresholds.
If I may, Commissioner, I'd
Please.
like Katie to share the 2-year process that we went through in coordination with legal counsel and staff to explain how we got to the 110, because it was quite a laborious process.
I mean, I would think if you're building, more than 11 units, then, maybe you should have to go through some extra hoops.
I just back to the 110 is a number that was established by OPR, and an agency does have discretion to set a different small project screening. It was just a suggestion. We did go through a process of reviewing how other agencies set their threshold or set their screening criteria, and in connection with the thresholds, and to make sure that we were capturing projects, 110 was set for, 110 was what our recommendation was for Encinitas, but you are correct. There are, shown on the screen here, there are various other numbers used by different agencies, and they were calculated in a variety of different ways. So certainly an option, but we did go through a process to look at the 110, and in light of it being recommended by OPR and being what many of your neighboring jurisdictions are using, that was the recommendation.
Now, our neighboring jurisdictions that are doing this, where are they setting their VMT thresholds of significance? At their citywide average, at regional average?
Most of them
That
for
would be an
residential,
interesting-
so residential projects, as far as I'm aware, the only agency that set their target, their threshold at regional average for residential projects is the city of San Diego. You'll note that the city of San Diego's citywide average is lower than the regional average, so it's an easier target for them to meet at the regional average. Which is why one of the reasons they selected that.
Well, that's not.
The other agencies nearby you, so for example, the city of Carlsbad, they're using citywide average for their residential target. San Marcos, most of the other cities, Escondido, that are shown on this slide.
All larger cities than ours. I think, I think the larger the city, the more finely you can slice it up and figure out, well, perhaps there are sections that are VMT efficient. I just feel that looking at ours sliced up into, whatever, no more than 12 or 15 little blocks, and half of them are VMT efficient, which is, there are big projects that I want to capture in this process. I do not want them slipping away. And there are small projects that I don't want to get snagged in it either. So we are going to be making recommendations to council, I believe. That's correct, right, Anna? Correct. So, I just roughly here, I'm hearing a consensus that we think 22.1 is too high. And I felt we could probably come to an agreement that, on our recommendation, that the citywide average less 15% might be proper. And we've just now started discussing it. It's like, are we concerned about these small projects? Would we prefer to capture less of them? And it's not up to us. We're not the ones making this rule. We're making a recommendation. Council will have their own.
I am
involved
concerned
discussions.
about catching too many the small projects, right?
We're-
I think you want to encourage the fine-grained development that might be 20 or 30 unit apartment building or a 15, housing, single-family houses. I'm sensitive to overreaching, and so that everything that comes through here has to go through CEQA, and it just becomes a de facto way of shutting down any new development.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, if a project's going to develop 300 ADT, it's like, and I'm going back to the old school method, that's like, below the level of significance. Usually it's like, we don't even
So
hit it.
just so like for San Diego's 300 ADT, we said a single-family house was 11 ADT, so this is, if that was 10, this is roughly 30 single-family houses.
That's right, yeah. And the city of San Diego, the way that they calculated 300 ADT was they did the exact same calculation as OPR did. So I explained before that OPR looked at a 10,000 square foot office building and calculated how many ADT that creates, because a 10,000 square foot addition is a categorically exempt size. The city of San Diego has city of San Diego specific trip generation rates, and their trip generation rate for office happened to result in 300 ADT as opposed to 110 ADT. Chula Vista and Escondido both have 200 ADT, and the way that their calculation was done was the exact same. They used the Sandag Not So Brief Guide, which is the resource that Evan showed you earlier for residential projects. But when you apply the Sandag office trip generation rate to 10,000 square feet of office, you get 200 ADT. So that's where that came from.
Thank you.
I really think that we do need to have some backbone. When it comes to greenhouse gas generation, we know that VMT is going to cause it, and the higher our number is, the more greenhouse gas there will be. If we're serious about reducing pollution, we have to understand that the state mandate for affordable housing is already exempting practically everything we build from CEQA. So having a few projects that actually have to mitigate greenhouse gas generation that they're doing is a good thing, in my opinion.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm thinking we've got to have a finer fishing net or a wider net, meaning I don't think every project that comes through here has the same pro forma and profit and ability to pay for all the offsite mitigation that we're going to ask for them to do. I'm thinking smaller projects. I think the larger projects that we're talking about, yeah, these guys probably have the wherewithal or capacity to do offsite improvements. And I'm just trying to parse how we would define that boundary, because I don't think every project that comes, some of these projects I think should be exempt because they're exactly the type of projects we need to encourage in our community. And then there's other projects that are very large, and I would say that those ought to be scrutinized a little bit. I would like, on some of the more recent ones that we've been looking at, I would like to have had a little teeth to say, well, we can't really stop you from doing this project, but we can insist that you do X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm. I would hope that what we're talking about here does that. And I agree with you. I agree with Commissioner Sherrod in that we have to reach, we have to try as hard as we can. I mean, I have no idea if these recommendations are consistent with our general plan, if they're consistent with our, per one of the correspondents, the Coastal Law Group talked about some inconsistencies with the current recommendation against our general plan and our greenhouse gas levels. So, we've tried in many levels within the city to reach for the moon and try to be, consistent with plastics policy, our mobility program. Everything is trying to reduce, and I don't want to give back all that momentum now when we've laid the groundwork in so many other places. I agree with you, Commissioner Dalton. I don't want to catch a 10-unit project. That's not the intent, to spend tens of thousands of dollars on CEQA. I understand that too. But if that 10-unit project happens to be in the middle of a Liebenhain, in the middle of the gnatcatcher site, then the answer is, yeah, I do want to catch that. That was the situation with some of the projects that were part of the housing element, and even the ones that were recently on the boards, on the commission's approval level, had environmental concerns, and they were able to mitigate that with some additional lands. So CEQA is expensive, but CEQA also serves a purpose and allows us to ask questions of the development. Small projects can't afford it, I get it. Big projects, what's a big project versus a small project? That's what I'm kind of wrestling with. I understand you're asking to draw the line in the sand so that we can define, in some ways, a big project versus a small project with this. And I appreciate that, and I'm wrestling with, because I don't have an answer for you. I don't want to get the small guy, but I want to get a project that does impact.
If I may, I
Please.
just want to make sure that we're all aware. This is specific to CEQA. We're talking solely about vehicle miles traveled, insofar as if there are impacts on species, or it's an ESHA, or some other reason that an environmental impact report would be required, that is still required. This is solely if the only thing that might cause it to be the EIR is the vehicle miles traveled. That's all we're talking about. So an EIR can still be required if it's in certain parts of town.
But the corollary to that is, if it passes all those other things,
correct,
we
so
would
this
still
might
have
be
the
one last way.
That's right.
To require an EIR.
That's right. So
Absolutely correct.
It's on the list of A, B, C, D, O, N, E, F, and this is
Correct.
the E and F part of the. And I get it. There's a line here. I don't know if I have the answer for the line. I agree with Commissioner Sherrod that we should probably be more aggressive. That's just my position. I also would like staff to address the Sierra Club's letter about the potential inconsistencies in the, per the correspondence. And I believe that both the Coastal Law Group and the Sierra Club referenced the same sections, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Katie to respond to that, because she is an industry leader in creating VMTs and substantial evidence. But I also wanted to point out that the CAP has the same TDM measures. So even if a project doesn't go through, is screened out and doesn't go through an EIR, it still has to comply with our CAP. So we're not losing the opportunity to get these TDM mitigation measures.
Your CAP, you're talking about the greenhouse gas cap?
The Climate Action Plan.
Climate Action Plan, excuse me.
Correct.
But there were some references to some inconsistencies in the language. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I just wanted to add that piece of information to your discussion, because I want to make sure that we're all aware that we still have every opportunity to capture the TDM measures that would be the same measures for an EIR through a VMT analysis. And I'll have Katie respond to the inconsistencies with the 3 letters that we received.
So the general plan does not have criteria around CEQA, VMT analysis for CEQA. So from that perspective, there's no inconsistency. We're setting new guidelines for how to analyze transportation impacts pursuant to the new CEQA guidelines, the new state law. And the general plan was adopted before that legislation went into effect in July of 2020. And so from that perspective, there's no inconsistency with that. The policies within the general plan that are established to, kind of further GHG reduction, even the guidelines as we have them outlined is going to reduce GHG from future development. So I do not see an inconsistency there. Mentioned the Climate Action Plan, which kind of came out of your general plan policies. There's no changes to your Climate Action Plan as a result of these thresholds. These are simply thresholds. This is the criteria in which you are disclosing CEQA impacts for transportation purposes.
but there was also some specific languages per page 21 of the staff report for the Sierra Club letter that Harold mentioned that David Grubb sent in. I believe that was also referenced, that same inconsistency represented in one of the paragraphs by the Coastal Law Group. I think it was
That's
paragraph.
that section, projects in a VMT efficient area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just, if we're going to vote on it, I want it to be consistent, and if it's inconsistent, or it is consistent, let us know. I just like to respond to the people that attended and
So it
submitted
should be
correspondence.
regional, or city.
That's right.
Yeah, so I guess to address the,
Page 20, this is page 21.
so for residential projects, so to be clear, projects in a VMT efficient area, for a residential project, the metric is VMT per capita. The OPR recommendation is that you can select between regional average or citywide average. We have suggested to use citywide average for residential projects. For employment projects, OPR recommends that you use regional average, and that's because employment tends to be more regional. Kind of thinking back to that initial introductory video that you saw, people will commute further because the benefit of that trip is larger. It's their job. And so OPR recommends that you use regional average when you are looking at VMT per employee. And so what has been proposed in the guidelines matches the kind of metric recommendations from OPR of citywide VMT per capita for residential projects and regional VMT per employee for employment-based projects.
So you're thinking that it is consistent and that the
Yeah, it's
correspondent
consistent
is
with,
not.
yeah, it's consistent with what OPR is recommending. Your general plan doesn't address this. This is not something that is addressed in your general plan.
Yeah. Thank you. That summed that up pretty nicely. I do look here at page 21, which I guess is page 5 of the report. I think, for me, it's mostly about the baseline city average. I think it's too high. I think it should be low. I think we should be capturing people. If I were to put this in terms of a motion to put towards the council, and I have not doing this just yet, I would propose that we go city average less 15% for the significance threshold, and I would propose that we take our small project and, I mean, everyone else is picking numbers out of there. I'll say 200 ADT. And that would be my recommendation to council. I think we should lower the significance threshold and raise the small project cutoff. And that's basically the only changes I would make to this.
Would you support the VMT exchange program?
I would, although it's like, geez, I got to ask staff, what would be involved in writing one of those? I mean, that doesn't sound like something you're just going to quick cobble together overnight. The VMT exchange program as per Escondido.
We do have in the guidelines, they currently have one of the options as a VMT exchange program. But as you mentioned, Commissioner Doyle, it's a process to do the analysis, the financial, economic analysis, and how that's set up. It's a separate work effort.
Yep. So, I mean, a good motion then would be those two elements I've projected, since we're making a recommendation, and and I will make this as a motion. I should make a motion that we recommend the significance threshold be citywide average, less 15%. The small project cutoff be, instead of 110 ADT, be 200 ADT. So we'll capture units of less than 20 units or less will be exempt. And further, since we are making recommendations, I would recommend that council immediately put staff to work preparing a VMT, what do we call that?
Exchange program.
Exchange
Program.
Thank you. VMT exchange program, as per Escondido's recommendation. We recognize this will take staff time.
Will you include the regional for employer development?
I think the regional for employer is already there.
Okay.
It's not regional minus 15%, it's regional. But it brings them both to about the same. But that would be my three-part motion.
And I believe, and if I may, a fourth part of your motion might be to include the staff changes that were recommended in the verbal staff report. They had a few minor changes.
Oh, thank you very much, Attorney Porter. And that would be the fourth option. And honestly, I don't remember which those two little fixes were, but
I would second that motion.
thank you. I've got a motion I've made and it's seconded by Commissioner Dalton. Do we have discussion before we vote? No? Let's do it.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to support the motion due to the using the citywide versus the regional. I'm more in support of the regional. I do appreciate all the other components of it, but I just think that we as a city just have to try harder. I think that we've tried so hard in so many levels that I'd hate to stop now. So I
Fair enough.
appreciate your position, and unfortunately, I cannot support
And
the
this,
motion.
this is a recommendation we're making to council. I feel that perhaps the staff report, as this goes in, could mention that there was disagreements on certain elements. As Commissioner Sherrod was hoping for lower on the citywide, and Mr. Prendergast, it's like all good points. How we doing on?
Can you reread the motion?
Oh, God, I can try. Okay. The motion is that we support a significance threshold of citywide average less 15%. We proposed instead of 110 ADT as the cutoff for small projects, 200 ADT, which would capture units of, or not capture units of less than 20 units. Jeez, I should have written this all down as I was going.
The regional.
Oh, yeah, it's the, we've suggested that council put staff time towards putting together a VMT exchange program as per Escondido's model. And we also propose that the two minor edits that were proposed in the verbal staff presentation be incorporated into this.
And also the regional for the non-residential.
That's actually written in, so we don't really need to make a recommendation. That's, other than that, we're in staff.
And I'm sorry, I know we're all done, but Scott, you had mentioned, Scott, you had mentioned a tie-in to some code references. That was for something earlier, sorry, never mind, I apologize.
Where are we at? Is that done? I missed that.
So the motion passed 3-2.
3-2. Thank you very much.
Commissioners Sherrod and Prendergast voting no.
Thank you very much, Scott. And this item's closed. Do we have any future items by planning commissioners? Nobody? Planning commission reports, anybody? Not much as secretary reports. Anna Kalamusi.
Yes, thank you. The Beacons Beach appeal, it will be heard at City Council on June 28th.
Okay.
And also the Piraeus project was appealed, and that will be heard on June 21st at City Council.
So what were the dates there? Beacons was?
Beacons, June 28th, and Piraeus, June 21st.
All right, those will be interesting meetings.
And then my last one is the AB 2011 and SB 6 workshop, the joint workshop with Planning Commission and City Council, scheduled for June 21st from 3 to 5 p.m. in the council chambers.
Well,
And that's all I have.
that's it.
Yes.
Well, in that case, I'm going to adjourn this meeting to our next regular planning commission of, wait a minute, that's not, what is that, June 15th? All right. Thank you, everyone.